Grillo here.
Lorick here.
Gavich here.
Guzikowski here.
Oldani here.
Seifert here.
Chandler here.
Okay. Carrie, would you please read in the notice of video conferencing?
The City of Oak Creek is authorized to hold this public meeting remotely during the COVID-19 public health emergency under the March 16th and March 20th advisories from the Office of Open Government in the Wisconsin Department of Justice. Per the advisories, this meeting being conducted via Zoom video conference with telephone conferencing capabilities was duly noticed per the City of Oak Creek Municipal Code and statutory notice requirements more than 24 hours in advance of the meeting. Members of the public have been advised of the options for participation via direct mailing to property owners within 300 feet of a proposal, via the COVID-19 information page on the city's website, via social media, and via the information contained on the meeting agenda. This meeting may also be viewed at the city's YouTube page, the link for which was contained in all aforementioned notice methods. The meeting recording will also be accessible on the city's YouTube page within 48 hours. Plan commissioners and participants are initially muted upon joining the meeting. Plan commissioners and staff have the ability to mute and unmute their microphones throughout the meeting. Please mute at all times except for roll call, motions, voting, and when recognized by the chair. Roll call and voting will occur per the usual and customary procedure, starting from Plan Commissioner seating positions south to north in the Common Council chambers, or as required by the chair. The chair will facilitate questions and comments by calling on each Plan Commissioner or by requesting the use of the raise hand function in the Zoom webinar control panel. Only speak once you have been recognized by the chair or moderator. Applicants, their representatives, and all other participants who wish to speak will be unmuted when there is a direct request for information from the Plan Commissioner's staff. When the participant utilizes the raise hand function within the Zoom webinar control panel and the moderator verbally indicates that they are unmuted, and when a phone participant dials *9 to indicate that they wish to speak and the moderator verbally indicates that their line is open. When unmuted, all participants must state their name and address for the record, then proceed with comments or questions. Questions and comments may be entered into the Q&A function within the Zoom webinar control panel. Staff and/or the moderator will monitor this function during the meeting and provide the information requested. There shall be no private messages or side conversations during the meeting utilizing the chat or Q&A functions. Chat and Q&A messages are part of the public record. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. And for the record, Commissioner Hanna has joined us. So that will get us to approval of minutes of March 9th, 2021. Commissioners, if you've all had a chance to look at them, and if there's no omissions, errors, corrections, discussion over them, I'll entertain a motion.
Seifert moves to approve the minutes of March 9th, 2021.
Chandler seconds.
Roll call, beginning with Commissioner Carrillo.
Grillo, aye.
Yes, please.
Grillo, aye.
Go ahead.
Lorick abstains.
Gavich, aye.
Guzikowski, aye.
Oldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Hannah, aye.
Sullivan, aye.
Okay. That will get us to our first item of the night. Under old
Mayor?
business. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Significant Common Council actions. Carrie.
There were two. There was a resolution that was approved vacating and discontinuing a part of a public street in the city, 60 feet wide in the southwest quarter and southwest quarter of the northwest. Basically, it was a street vacation. Also approved a resolution approving a certified survey map submitted by David Decker of Decker Properties for the properties at 8100 and 8146 South 27th Street and 8100 South Orchard Way. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. That will get us to 5A, which is a landscape review plan submitted by John Schleter, Frontline Development for multi-tenant building at the property at 9141 South 13th Street. I'll turn it over to Carrie now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Plan commissioners will recall that this was reviewed as part of the overall site and building plan review at the last meeting on the 9th, but the landscape plan still had some work to be done, addressing some concerns that were raised by staff and by the plan commissioners, and was brought back for plan commission review for tonight. So some of the concerns you will recall include the screening of the loading docks. The landscaping was not sufficient to do so. The screening wall that was originally included as part of that landscape plan was missing some details, and we'll come back to that as well. Landscaping was also proposed right on the property line, and staff had concerns with regard to maintenance of such. Those landscape elements have been pulled back within the property lines themselves. And there were some landscape elements that were shown in easements that staff were concerned may actually not be allowed. There was also a comment regarding increased landscaping required, particularly on the west and east sides, as the site had been pretty much cleared prior to city reviews and approvals. So we're going to break it up into 4 quadrants again so that the Plan Commission can get an idea of what has been modified for those landscape plans. Quite a bit of landscaping actually has been added to all sections. The northwest corner here, we do see more landscape elements. And some of these are installed at a height of 18 inches all the way up to several feet. I think the largest install would be 8 feet. We do need to make sure that those landscape elements do have the installation and maturity size as part of the overall landscape plan. Again, northeast corner and showing what would be partial screening on the 13th Street side. You'll recall again that the north side is where the employee and visitor parking is located. Southwest corner, this was one of the main areas of concern for staff regarding screening of those loading docks. So additional landscape elements have been installed or proposed to be installed on this side to screen those loading dock areas. And those landscape elements are again at larger or taller heights, excuse me, to further block those loading docks from the I-94 corridor. There's also additional landscaping that has been provided along the south to screen those loading docks from properties, particularly Steinhoffels. And then again, on the southeast quarter, that landscape treatment has been wrapped around that corner. One thing that is missing, even though there has been installation of additional elements here and taller elements, is that screen wall. Staff is still recommending that that screen wall at a minimum height be included as part of those plans. It was something that will further screen those loading docks, especially from the residential portion that is across the street. And we are recommending that that be included as part of this approval. There's a suggested motion on the screen for approval incorporating conditions of approval. Those that were included as part of the March 9th review are remaining valid. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Appreciate that. Who do we have with us from IT tonight? Before I take a guess, and I'm usually wrong.
It's time tonight, Mr. Mayor.
Hi, Tom. How are you? Do we have anybody in the queue wishing to speak from Frontline?
I do have 2 applicants and one
Okay.
person raising their hand right now.
Okay, please put them through, Tom, before we go to the commission.
John, you can unmute yourself now and please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, everyone. John Schlieder, Frontline Commercial Real Estate, 7265 South First Street, Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Thank you for having us again, Mr. Mayor, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, John. Next in the queue.
Matt, if you'd like to talk, please raise your hand on the Zoom. You can now unmute yourself and please state your name and a record.
Yep, this is Matt Carey from Pinnacle Engineering Group. We are at 20725 Watertown Road, Suite 100 in Brookfield. We are the civil engineer and landscape architect for the project. And just want to let the Planning Commission know we are available for any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Is that it for the queue? No residents? That's it?
There were no residents that registered for this specific.
Okay. Great, thank you. We'll go to the commission, starting with Commissioner Hanna.
I have no question, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Sullivan,
No questions either.
Commissioner Carrillo,
Nothing for me.
Commissioner Lorick,
No questions. I was absent from the meeting on the 9th. But from the minutes and the description, it looks like they came really close to meeting what was asked of them, with the exception of that wall, the screening wall, but that's one of the conditions, so I don't have concerns there. So thank you.
okay, thank you, Greg. Commissioner Guzekowski,
This is in my district. I did not get any call from any residents this time around. I did get a call from John about asking my opinion on what they presented, but we did not talk. And I do appreciate the extra work they've done to get it to where it's at. But I would really request significantly that they do add in that berm wall and type of screening.
okay, thank you, Chris.
Yep.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
I have no questions.
Commissioner Siebert,
No questions at this time.
and Commissioner Chandler.
I do have a question for the applicant. It was identified that landscaping was in the easement. I just wanted to get your feedback on this issue.
Actually, Matt, if you could answer this one that's of a more technical nature with the easement, I would certainly appreciate it.
Sure. With respect to that. That is a 12-foot wide deep energy easement that runs
Oh, you're fading out pretty bad, Matt.
along the eastern property line. It's actually an empty easement in the fact that there's no existing utilities that run through there now. It's actually a reservation for We Energies in the future. All of the base of the plantings is outside of that 12-foot wide easement along that lot.
Okay, did commissioners hear that? I know the audio got a little garbled there. From what I understand, it's a We Energies easement, and please correct me if I'm wrong. And the plantings are outside of the 12-foot easement. Matt, is that correct? Because your audio really didn't come through for us.
Yes, if you can hear me, that is correct. And I apologize about the audio here.
Okay. From staff's perspective, Carrie, can you elaborate a little bit on that? Do you have any knowledge of it?
It's going to be something that will have to be coordinated with We Energies in terms of canopy. Outside of the easement for planting, it's fine. Just need to be aware that if they need something to go, if there's overhead power lines or something that'll be affected, that canopy could be reduced. If it's not our easement, it's really not anything that we have much control over, but we want to make sure that if We Energies has any requirements for them to move that landscaping, we would request that that landscaping be pulled back onto the property further west rather than eliminated completely.
Okay. Which is pretty standard for We Energies, even in a resident district. So. Okay, Commissioner Chandler, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, anything further?
Nothing else.
Okay, I don't have any comments. You know, I'm happy to see the enhanced landscape. The wall, again, I didn't have strong feelings, but I will side with staff on that. They do know best. Otherwise, I'm happy with it. So if there's no further discussion or questions, motion, please.
Guzekowski makes a motion that the Plan Commission approves landscape plan submitted by John Schleter, Frontline Commercial Real Estate LLC for the property at 9141 South 13th Street with the following conditions. One, that all relevant code requirements are in effect. Two, that all conditions of approval from March 9th remain in effect. Three, that all plans are revised to incorporate a screen wall, minimum height of 10 feet on the east side of the loading dock. And four, that all detailed revised plans are submitted in digital format to the Department of Community Development prior to submission of permit applications.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call starting with Commissioner Lorick.
Lorick, aye.
Bukevich, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Hold aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Hannah, I.
Sullivan, aye.
Grillo, I.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate the effort and appreciate the work that staff put in on this. Turn this around in a 2-week period like that. I know there was some discussion if we could do it, but obviously you guys got it done and want to thank you for that. So thank you very much. Item 6A under new business, it is review of a request for a temporary use permit for Westview Gardens for a temporary garden center for the parking lot at 7501 South Howell, also known as Classic Lanes. Carrie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the current zoning is for commercial use before highway business. There is a conditional use permit on the property, but that does not affect this temporary use permit request. It's for Westview Gardens. We've seen this for the last 11 years. It's been approved in the south portion of the Classic Lanes parking lot. And for those who are unfamiliar with it, the request is for a 16 by 48 hoop house in that southern corner. What's on the screen right now is showing you a Google image street view from last year, actually. So you can get an idea of just the small scale nature of the garden center that's being proposed. Just one hoop house, one sign that unfortunately in this image shows that it's been blown over, but 132 square foot sign has been approved in previous years for this. Operations as part of the request are Monday through Saturday, 9 to 5 and 9 to 4 on Sundays. Staff is recommending that we give them an extra hour for each day, just in case of contingencies, so that they can go a little bit later. Weekend hours tend not to be that big of an issue. Of course, if Classic Lanes has any concerns with that, it's their property and they can certainly negotiate with the temporary use permit applicant. You will note that there is a new person running the Westview Gardens temporary garden center this year. And basically it's the same setup, and there will be water supplied and restroom supplied by Classic Lanes as part of that recommendation letter that was received. So there is a suggested motion on the screen that incorporates some conditions of approval, most of which have been from previous years. There is one portion of the final motion or the final condition here that mentions restoration of the site to its pre-temporary use permit condition. That's just to ensure that there's no trash left behind. There was one concern in previous years with some trash that had been left in the kind of the tall grass area. We haven't had any complaints of that since, so there's no concerns on staff's part. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Would the applicant like to say anything before we begin, or should we go right to the commission? Tom?
I do have the applicant registered and on the call right now.
Okay, would they like to say anything or they want to wait for questions?
Looks like they would like to speak now.
Okay, put them on, please.
Please unmute yourself, state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Casey Ertl, and my address is 8818 West 5 Mile Road, Franksville, Wisconsin. And I don't really have anything extra to add. She pretty much covered everything. It's all going to be the same. I'm just going to be running it versus Larry this year. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'm here to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Casey. We will start with Commissioner Chandler.
No questions.
Commissioner Hannah,
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Sullivan,
I have no questions either. Thank you.
Commissioner Carrillo,
Nothing for me.
Commissioner Lorick,
No questions or concerns. Thank you.
Commissioner Guzekowski,
None for me.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
No questions.
Commissioner Siebert,
No questions.
and I have none myself. We go through this every year, and again, it's a really nice endeavor they do there for us, and it's been working out pretty well. So I have no concerns with it whatsoever. So if we could get a motion on 6A, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. Lorg moves that the Plan Commission approves the temporary use permit request submitted by Casey Ertl, Westview Gardens, for the operation of a garden center in the parking lot on the property at 7501 South Howell Avenue with the following conditions. Number one, that all relevant code requirements remain in effect. Number two, that all garden center activities shall be located within the portion of the parking lot as per the proposed map. Number three, that operations shall occur between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday through Saturday and 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Sunday. Number four, that signage for the operation is limited to one 32 square foot temporary sign. And number five, that the temporary use permit shall be valid between April 15th, 2021 and July 20th, 2021. The property shall be restored to its pre-temporary use condition by no later than July 23rd, 2021.
Guzekowski, I'll second.
Before we roll call, I do have one question. Will you open on April 15th or will it be a little bit later? Still with us, Casey?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, we'll be setting up the temporary hoop house around the 15th, but we won't actually open up until probably May, depending on the weather. So like the 1st of May usually.
Okay, thank you. Just as people ask, I like to be able to tell them. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, roll call, starting with me. Aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
O'Donnell, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Hannah, I.
Sullivan, I.
Carrillo, I.
Lorick, aye.
Okay, thank you very much, Casey. Good luck. Item 6B, an official map amendment consideration. It affects the parcels at 9970, 120, and 140 South 20th. And then there's some legal descriptions of the plot. I will turn that over to Carrie for a far better explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Essentially, the official map amendment affects the three properties at the addresses as stated. One of the things that we're going to be talking about extensively is a history of this property, just so that everybody is aware of how that official map is, how it was created. But for now, the proposal is for a cul-de-sac termination at the end of Ridgeview Drive on the property at 9970 South 20th Street. These properties are proposed to be combined by CSM in anticipation of developing the properties. That is forthcoming for a very near future review by the Plan Commission. There's also a potential cul-de-sac termination for 20th Street that we'll be discussing, but it's not part of tonight's consideration. So a little bit of history. These three parcels were originally part of an overall subdivision plan called Oakview Manor or Oak Creek Manor. And it was split by the freeway. And the portion that was constructed was on the east side and the west side was never constructed. It included single family residential properties and public streets. That was actually never constructed, of course. It was vacated by the courts. And during the 1980s, the Common Council and the Plan Commission had considered several options for official streets through this area for connectivity purposes. They had about 5 options that were considered, and that was kind of brought about whenever these properties were up for a proposal for development for a non-residential development that, of course, never came to fruition. All in all, there was an official map amendment that was adopted by Ordinance 1300 in 1988, resulting in the official street map pattern before you, which is that yellow dotted area that is on the street or on the screen right now. The one that we are concerned with, of course, is the street pattern that affects the parcels that are outlined in red. Now, for consideration purposes, there are many reasons why we have considered this connection between 20th Street and South Ridgeview Drive to be impractical at this time. There's topography that wasn't necessarily considered whenever this layout was adopted. Environmental features over the years that have proven to kind of expand wetlands, for instance. There's several owners that are involved that would have extreme coordination with regard to constructing these official streets. And then, of course, the economic consideration with constructing a fully public street. We've had many conversations with developers over the years with regard to these properties, even regarding the properties that many may recall were had been consolidated by Black Bear. And those considerations just never came to fruition. We can never get it to kind of pan out. So the request before you tonight is actually for Ridgeview Drive to terminate in a cul-de-sac and remove that official street pattern from the 3 properties. Also for consideration is not for tonight, but what a future layout might look like for termination of South 20th Street in a cul-de-sac further north and eliminating the potential for that connection to 20th Street further south. At this point, staff does not see that further continuation of South 20th Street beyond a cul-de-sac termination is within the realm of possibility, at least in the near to medium term future. So that's a lot to consider, but the cul-de-sac is really what we are proposing for the Plan Commission's consideration tonight. And that's what the suggested motion on the screen is for. It's for the removal of that street pattern as it affects those 3 properties. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Before we go on, Tom, is the applicant with us? Would they like to say anything before we go to the commission?
The applicant is with us and they are raising their hand.
Please put them on.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. This is Brian Randall, attorney with Davis and Kielfeld, 111 East Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
All right. Hello, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing well, Mr. Mayor, members of the Plan Commission. It's good to see all of you. I know I'm just a blank screen to you, but it's a pleasure to be before the Oak Creek Plan Commission once again. In working on this project for the past several months, we have, as a team, been able to work very well and collaboratively with city staff. I very much appreciate Carrie's efforts as she just explained a lot of the history behind this site and the overall area. What I'd like to do this evening, if it's okay, and I do have a slide presentation that's about 8 slides long, to just show you a little bit more about what's going on overall. This is the first formal step in a multi-step process for tonight's agenda item, but we will be back before the Plan Commission in the future, and I can show some of that if that's acceptable to the Plan Commission.
Yes, please go ahead.
All right, and I don't know.
Actually, I think Tom would share the screen with you, Brian.
All right.
Ryan, you're muted.
I just saw that. Can you hear me now? I see Alderman Guzekowski nodding yes, and hopefully Truck Country is up on the screen right now.
Yes.
Thank you. Again, this is the agenda item before us tonight. The project team that I mentioned is many of whom are actually online and registered to speak. Certainly we can answer questions as needed, but we also will be back before the Plan Commission coming up. But Chris Johns and Phil Meyer of Epstein Ewan have led the architectural design efforts. We have JSD on the civil engineering front, as well as the wetlands that we're working through, as Carrie alluded to. Sam Dickman Jr., one of the local real estate brokers, has been instrumental in putting everything together. Truck Country does already own this site. And then my colleague Ryan Spott has been helping me on this. The Truck Country story, in case you're not familiar, we are located already in the city of Oak Creek at 2222 West Ryan Road. It's a family-owned company that is in the business of new and used truck sales and service, as well as trailers, primarily in the Midwest. And as I mentioned, of the Wisconsin locations, already one of the Oak Creek community members over on Ryan Road, just to the north of this site. Truck Country is a growing company that is positioned to invest in this particular market. So it acquired the sites that we're talking about tonight, and it's the first step in this formal process that we have, although we've had 2 pre-application staff meetings and a great deal of productive dialogue with staff and many back and forth opportunities. These parcels Carrie already showed to you. As I mentioned, this is south of Ryan Road, where the Truck Country existing dealership is located. It's in the South Branch Industrial Park. And you can see with that dotted gray line, this is the city's GIS map. It shows what the official street map location is today through the middle of these sites, although that street does not exist today. The Ridgeview Drive on the far upper right-hand corner does have what we've learned to be a temporary cul-de-sac. And so these properties, when that layout was probably contemplated when separate parcel ownership was the case, but now Truck Country has consolidated the ownership. And as Carrie mentioned, we will do a certified survey map to combine them all. But also interestingly, the street address, as the mayor announced, we're a South 20th Street address, but that street doesn't actually service this property. So again, what we're doing here with the cul-de-sac, and we'll show you, we'll create a permanent situation. It may not change our address, but at least it creates a little bit more of a recognition of the current situation by way of the roads. M1 zoning is the designation. This is simply a preview of things to come. I don't want to stray from the official agenda notice and the item tonight, but as I mentioned, it's a multi-step process. So you might be wondering why we're looking to change that official street map. And this tells the story. It's the package that we filed for next month's meeting. And it just shows how roadways through the middle of the site would really compromise our ability to achieve the highest and best development potential of this particular site, with a brand new service building and dealership location, as well as the inventory locations, having the proper stormwater management, and also absorbing the cul-de-sac on our site as part of something that we would dedicate that to the city as a part of the right of way. So we have the site plan on your left, a building image on the right, and kind of an aerial view of the site plan looking back to the southwest that shows our surrounding neighbors and some of those other industrial facilities, the cul-de-sac as it will be absorbed on our site, and then the lands to the south that aren't developed right now, and they can coexist certainly in their current state, especially with what we propose to be robust landscaping along that perimeter. But again, that'll be reviewed with great detail in April, and our full team will be available to discuss that. What we learned in working with staff is that there are a variety of potential future road locations within the city's mapping documents. On the left is the image that you've already seen that shows the current GIS, which has the loop proposal that could go back up to South 20th Street. We appreciate and we recognize as staff is indicating that's impractical right now. but the comprehensive plan also shows a couple other potential options. In the middle is a westerly route that again would be going through the truck country site and potentially connect to Corporate Reserve on the far west. That would impact other properties, of course, doing it that way. And then on page 55 of the comprehensive plan, a southerly route down to Oakwood Road. And in working with staff and what the various options on both our site layout and beyond, we've come up with what is in your packet, and Carrie showed this earlier. It shows the Ridgeview Drive permanent cul-de-sac built to city specifications pursuant to the code and the engineering review. And so that's in the upper right circle. And in the lower left would be a potential future access to Judith Place if the development in the area were to occur and if that was an appropriate addition at that time. So we're showing how it could be accommodated. We're showing the cul-de-sac for Ridgeview Drive. And of course, then it's almost like an eraser, the dotted lines that are the official street map right now through the middle of the site would be removed as part of this action. This action requires Plan Commission recommendation. That's what we're here for tonight. It does, however, go to the Common Council for a public hearing and formal review and vote. And as mentioned, we'll come back next month with our site and building plan review with many more details about that, and probably the opportunity where you'll be able to hear from others like our architect and our civils beyond Brian as your friendly face, even though you can't see my face. So there is our final slide. Thank you. We can certainly answer questions, and really appreciate the staff's time on this, working with us to get to this point and the next several steps that will be before you.
Great, thank you, Brian. And is that it? You're just representing the team, or is there anybody else that wishes to say anything before we go to the commission?
I am just representing the team. If anyone else chooses to raise their hand, they certainly could, but I think we contemplated that I could give the overview, and if specific questions came up now, great, and others can be addressed in April.
Okay, we will go right to the commission then, and Commissioner Hanna, would you like to start us off?
Sure. It looks like a nice presentation. I have no concern thus far.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Sullivan?
I have no concern. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Carrillo?
No concerns for me either.
Okay. Commissioner Lorick?
No questions. I know this item is just about the official street pattern, but the proposed development and what was shown now so far looks good. So I have no issues with this one. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Guzikowski?
Well, this does fall into my district, and I did get one email about it. The concern of 20th Street, Judith Place going through to Ridgeview is what they were thinking when they got their notice. But Carrie did a great job of explaining to them that the street would be ending in a cul-de-sac like was shown here. And I wasn't really looking at it close enough to see that the Judith Place possibly could be accessed from the back of the building. They're looking for a quiet street, so they're I think most of the neighbors there would not be in any favor of any type of access street going south on Judith Place. It's a residential street of like 8 houses or something like that, I think. So give or take. So that would be it. Otherwise, the proposal is I'm in favor of.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Commissioner O'Donnell?
No, I don't have any questions. Yeah, as long as just to be clear, the Judith Place is just a potential in the future, not part of this motion, correct, Carrie?
Commissioner Aldani, I can answer that. The South Judith Place connection would be limited as far as staff is recommending in a future layout, not this consideration, for emergency access only. Okay, so that does not mean that it would be an amendment to the official map to include a future connection to Judith Place. What we would be talking about, whenever the site layout comes before the Plan Commission would be only a reservation for emergency access. It would not be utilized by any trucks. It would not be utilized by any customers. There would be no through street there that staff would be recommending.
Okay, that's it. That was my only question. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you for that, Carrie, by the way.
okay, Commissioner Siepert.
I don't have any problems as long as we take care of Judith Place. That's the only concern I had.
Okay,
So other than that, it looks good.
okay. Commissioner Chandler.
No questions.
Okay. I know Assistant Chief Havey's with us. Any concerns out of fire?
Mayor Mike Havey, Assistant Chief Oak Creek Fire. I'm not sure if you can hear me or see me right now.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay. Yeah, we reviewed this plan and the layout with the road access. We were satisfied with the roundabout and the proposal at this point.
Okay, thank you. I did have some questions on it earlier. I conferred with staff actually for the meeting to confer on that one spot. I thought we were landlocking it, but that all got cleared up in the conversation with staff, and they laid out the same points you heard. So at this point, I don't have any questions or comments for it either. So there's nothing further. We'll look for a motion on B, please.
Mr. Mayor, before you call for a motion, I do
Yes.
know that there are several neighbors that are on the call. If they have any comments to,
I did not know that. Thank you, Carrie. Yeah, please put them on. Wish I would have thought of that.
If you wish to speak, please raise your hand. Stacey, you may unmute your mic. Please state your full name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Stacy Seekert. I live at 10132 South Judith Place, Oak Creek, Wisconsin. We actually just moved to Oak Creek in August. We bought this nice house on a quiet dead-end street with a beautiful farm in front of us, farm behind us, and nothing at the end of the street. So when I did get this letter in the mail last week, I was quite concerned. Reinhardt, I can already hear, the lights are fairly bright. So I was very interested to sit in this meeting today and listen to what was going to be proposed. From listening to you, it does sound like there's more meetings that I'm going to have to attend and argue with. This one today, just this cul-de-sac on Ridgeview, doesn't necessarily affect us, but I am very concerned now on what they plan on doing on this business. Doesn't look like there will be enough trees in between it compared to my neighbor Kaylee's yard. And I'm very concerned about Judith. It's a tiny little street. I mean, my kids play in the front yard, and I definitely don't want any big trucks coming up and down when, you know, I'm literally 10 feet away from a one-way road. So those are a couple of my concerns, and I will join the next meeting or any other meetings on this topic.
Correct. And Stacy, you should get notification of that. The ordinance reads within 300 feet. So you probably got a letter stating this change. So you'll definitely get it as any proposals come about on that property to the north of you.
Okay. And like most of the neighbors on Judith then too?
Within 300 feet. Again, you can also let your neighbors know, and it's also the alderman's discretion to increase the distance on notification.
Okay. And I think that that would be a good idea if they would ever want to consider using Judith to get out to Oakwood, since it is such a little street, and a lot of the neighbors that are closer to Oakwood, you know, had no idea about this, or that potentially Judith could even be used for traffic. Yeah, for all the trucking.
And again, fortunately, your alderman does sit on planning. So yeah, you see that right there. You have a very quick connection to him. But again, just because it's officially mapped doesn't exactly mean it's going to happen right away either. So,
okay. Okay.
But they always keep their options open, so to speak, for future.
Okay.
Okay, Stacy?
Yes, and the next meeting, I'll get another letter in the mail. You said that was in April.
It looked like it was April 13th, so I would think you would be. Planning Commission meets every other Tuesday, so 2
Mayor?
weeks from tonight. Yes.
There may be some consideration with regard to the official map amendment because that does need to be warned. So while we'll take a look at that and confirm, everybody who is within 300 feet of a proposal, unless Alderman for the district requests an increase as you stated, there will be notice for all future meetings. But the official map amendment does need to be approved by the Common Council, and it does affect the development for the 2 or the 3 properties.
Correct. And the CSM's coming through too, which is a certified survey map, Stacy.
Yes, that is to combine the properties, and that'll be reviewed concurrently with the site plan.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor and Carrie. If we could just, for any other meetings pertaining to this, if we could include any of the residents that are on Judith Place, please, because there's not that many. Go down, if we can take the addresses on Judith Place all the way to Oakwood Road, please.
Yes, sir.
For notification.
Duly noted, Chris. Good job.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that it, Stacy? Or do you have any other further comments?
I think for now, that's it. I didn't
Okay.
get any texts from my neighbors, so I think we're okay for right now.
Okay. Tom, any other residents wishing to speak?
We have 2 more at the moment.
Okay, put them through. I wish I would have did this sooner. Sorry about that.
Christopher, please unmute your mic and state your full name and address for the record.
Well, I'm not a resident. I may be speaking out of turn. My name is Christopher Johns. I'm with Epstein Unit Architects. I'm working on the proposed project. But it is not our intention to connect this development to Judith. So I wanted to have that be part of the known direction here. So
okay,
that was not our intention.
That's helpful to know as well. Thank you. And next, Tom.
Mary, please unmute your mic and state your full name and address for the record.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Mary Lavin, 10126 South Judith Place, Oak Creek, Wisconsin. I'm 1 house away from the development. I've lived here way too long. Anyway, yeah, the property's been a beautiful empty piece of property before they bulldozed it and started farming it. But anyway, just wanted to state that I'm very happy to hear that they're not interested in connecting 20th Street into Judith Place. Just the way it was worded, it had me a little concerned. Access for emergencies makes me wonder what type of access they might want to incorporate on their end facing Judith Place. Also, I'd like to just say thank you for letting us know about this development. Like I say, it's been for sale forever. So I was quite surprised when something finally happened. But if they could be good neighbors, I noticed that they do have quite a bit of landscaping on that plan that we saw. But like Reinhardt actually put in a berm, which is really nice. We can still hear them every time they back up. It's continuous beep, beep, beeps over here, but the berm has helped reduce some of the noise and some of the lights. So we're a little concerned about noise pollution and light pollution from this development once it gets up and running. If there's any consideration about possibly putting in a berm to separate the development from the residential. And then also it seems like an awful lot of paved surface, and there is a lot of wetlands around here. They got that one small, looks like retaining pond on the far end away. Just hoping that that's enough. And then also the other thing is there's no park in this quarter section of Oak Creek. And that Judith Place being a quiet little dead end street, a lot of people along Oakwood Road use it for walking. And then also the field that they're going to develop We've used it over the years to walk. It's our little piece of nature, and now it'll be gone. Also considering the amount of wildlife that gets disrupted over here. So this is another corridor that's being taken away. Any consideration of possibly leaving maybe a walking path between Reinhardt and Truck Country?
You know, Mary, these are all very valid points, but they would come up during the discussion of
Right, I understand
the
that, but I
plans.
just kind of wanted to express a few things because I know everything's already planned out, mapped out, architectured, and all of that. I just kind of wanted to express a few opinions and thoughts, and thank you for your time and consideration.
No, not at all. And we have looked at numerous locations for a park in that area.
Oh, I know.
It's believe me, the iterations of it.
Yeah, they
have been
even tried the little undeveloped lot across the street from us. Almost tried to get a grant a couple of times for that.
Yes, there were a couple of things in your area we tried and it just didn't work.
Doesn't work.
But we're always pursuing it. And again, those are excellent suggestions. And I think it's important that early on that what you stated that the developer hears, because can make the process that much better and attractive to the community. So
right, just to be a nice neighbor.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Thanks. It's
Okay,
a little
Mary.
separation because that's light industrial and we're residential, and we just like to keep the border the way it is.
I get you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Tom, are there any other residents or was that the end of it?
There are a few more. If anyone would like to talk, if you could please raise your hand in the Zoom function. And nobody at this time, Mr. Mayor, is raising their hand.
Okay. I know I called for a motion. Did we get one, Carrie?
Yeah, I started, Mayor. I started one.
You did. Okay, Chris, could you just restate the motion?
Yep. Guzikowski makes a motion that the Plan Commission recommends to the Common Council that the official map for a portion of the mapped unimproved future right-of-way affecting the properties at 9970, 120, and 140 South 20th Street be removed after a public hearing.
Seconds.
Okay. Roll call starting with Alderman Guzikowski, please.
Guzikowski, aye.
Oldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Anna, aye.
Sullivan, aye.
Brillo, aye.
Lorik, aye.
And Bukevich, aye. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Good discussion. Item 6C is a consideration of a certified survey map submitted by F Street Development Group and the City of Oak Creek dividing properties at 4001 and 4200 East Lake Vista Parkway. Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a certified survey map that is a joint application with the members of F Street and the City of Oak Creek. And this is in regard to a future development for Lakeshore Commons. This was presented for Plan Commission information at the December 8th meeting, you'll recall. There are several zoning districts that are affecting these properties, none of which are entirely relevant to the CSM as proposed in terms of requirements, because all of the lots, with the exception of the outlot, meet the district requirements. These will be further divided as we get into the development itself. So these are kind of placeholders to divide the park property and future development areas so that the Lakeshore Commons plans can proceed. As part of this CSM, there will be official dedication of the public street for Lake Vista Parkway and Lake Vista Boulevard. On the screen right now is the overall certified survey map showing you those proposed lots. You will note that the lot configurations are a little bit interesting. Part of that has to do with the environmental and maintaining ownership of the environmental area with the park for the city's ownership purposes. This is another page of the certified survey map, and this is identifying the wetlands and also those environmental areas. The wetlands are not all going to be maintained on the property. Some of them have been identified as being artificial, and some of them will be removed. There are some that will require permitting as well. Those will be identified and dealt with at a later date. But this is identifying all of the wetlands that have been identified on the property to date. There will be labels on here identifying those that will be removed. And then finally, this is the last graphical depiction of the certified survey map. This is indicating easements that are on the property. There may be some adjustments that may be necessary, and staff continues to work with the F Street group and their surveyors to ensure that all of the required easements are shown on the map. There is a suggested motion for approval on the screen for Plan Commission consideration. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Tom, is there anyone in the queue waiting to speak on the issue?
I do have one registered individual. If they would like to speak, if they could raise their hand in the Zoom function. And put them through now. Jessica, if you can unmute your microphone and state your full name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Guzman. I'm with F Street Development Group. Business address is 1134 North 9th Street, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Just want to thank everyone for your time tonight, and I am available to answer any questions that Plan Commission may have.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Appreciate that. We'll go to the commission, starting with Chauncey.
No questions here.
Okay, I reversed myself. Fred.
No, I have no questions at this time.
Okay, Don.
No questions.
Chris.
None for me, please. Thank you.
Greg.
No questions, thank you.
Dawn.
Nothing for me.
Matt.
Nothing, thank you.
And Christine.
Actually, I do have a concern more than just a question, because I visit this area quite often and I see a lot of nature in that community, or that area, I should say. So what are the approaches to save this nature environment from the wetland concept, or like the nature? I see a lot of deers there, a lot of wild turkeys, that type of thing. So I think we need to kind of think from the environmental process and to maintain this type of nature.
Okay.
Commissioner
Carrie?
Hanna, this is Carrie. Lots 2 and 1 are proposed at this time to be maintained and controlled by the city. Lot 2 contains all of, well, most of Lake Vista Park, as well as the environmental area that is also identified as a large wetland, but it's a preservation area as part of the protected portion of the property with regards to deed restrictions. Lot 1 contains the overlook. It also contains the beacon at the northern portion of the property, the pathways down to the lake itself, and the remaining undeveloped portion that continues along Lake Vista Boulevard. Some of those wetlands, again, have been identified by the DNR as being artificial, so they are exempt. And then there are some wetlands for the future development, the developable portions of lots 3 and outlot 1 that would be proposed to be filled. The bird blinds are part of the park. They will remain, and we are going to be maintaining that portion of the wooded area that currently has the walking paths through them to the lake at this time. So understand your concerns, and as we continue to move along with the development plans for this, we are incorporating as much nature as we possibly can into those plans, and I think that some of those questions will be answered more thoroughly when we get to site plan review.
Thanks, Carrie. But another question or comments or concern, I should say, how about public access to the neighbors' parks or pathways? Is this going to be looked into also when you do your future planning for those future parcels or development?
Absolutely. Connectivity throughout the entire development and the park and down to Bender Park have all been part of the planning effort for this development.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christine. I have no questions at this time. So with that, motion, please.
Seifert moves that the planning commission recommends to the common council that the certified survey map submitted by F Street Development Group and the city of Oak Creek for the properties at 4200 East Lake Vista Boulevard and 4001 East Lake Boulevard Parkway be approved with the following conditions. That all technical corrections, including but not limited to spelling errors, minor coordinate geometry corrections, and corrections required for compliance with the multiple and Wisconsin statutes are made prior to recording.
Oracle second.
Roll call starting with Commissioner O'Donnell.
O'Donnell, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Hannah, aye.
Sullivan, aye.
Gurlo, aye.
Lorik, aye.
Kavich, aye.
Guzikowski, aye.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will move right along on to 6D, and that is consideration of a conditional use permit by HSA Commercial for a conditional use for a freight yard, freight terminal, transshipment depot facility at 150 West Oakview Parkway. Carrie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My buttons weren't working with me. This is a proposal for a conditional use permit for the property at 150 West Oakview Parkway. This is within Oakview Business Park, so the zoning is M1 PUD. And we are talking about distribution and allowance for the freight yard, freight terminal, transshipment depot facility that we've become accustomed to. We are going to be reviewing site and building plans for this property as well. That's in the next agenda item following this review. There are potential uses as identified at light industrial, manufacturing, warehouse, and distribution, although no tenants for the proposed building have yet to be announced. Up to 4 can be accommodated in the building, which is about 131,000 square feet. There are a total of 15 loading docks proposed with 2 drive-in doors at either end. And there are some parking stalls that have been identified for trailers in between those loading docks as well. Those are for temporary uses. You'll note that there is permanent trailer parking on the north side of the property for 37. And that is separated entirely from the 125 employee and visitor parking stalls on the southwest and south. They are anticipated to have up to 150 employees on the site at any given shift. Unfortunately, with the fact that this is a building that we don't have tenants identified for yet, we don't know exactly how many employees are going to be on site. We don't know exactly what the nature of the businesses are going to be. So everything in terms of the number of employees, the anticipated hours, and the parking stalls are all based on assumptions. So we're going to be talking about parking, particularly as there was a modification request as part of this conditional use permit request as well. So 24/7 operations that could be, modified based on the tenant needs. So the modification request, if we look at the parking stalls required per code, it's based on either manufacturing, warehouse, or just total square footage plus employees. So with the number of employees that are anticipated, and that's probably more than what will be there, And assuming that most of the building will be used for warehouse purposes, the square footage, they do appear to be short on parking. Short by probably about 50 or so parking stalls. So that modification request is asking for the Plan Commission to identify or actually approve of a reduction in the total parking stalls for employees and visitors. It says nothing, it's entirely separate from the trailer parking. So that modification request was provided, and there are portions of code that were also included in the staff report for Plan Commission consideration. So staff has no concerns with the total number of parking stalls that are proposed. This is just something that, because the code has this requirement, and because this is, there have been no tenants identified at this point, this is something that needs to be identified at this juncture rather than, going to the plan review and then addressing it at that point. Although tonight it's the same review night. So if there are any clarifications that will be needed for that, I'm happy to do so. Otherwise, there is a suggested motion on the screen for approval. And I do believe that the applicant's representative has a presentation for the Plan Commission consideration as well. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Tom, as long as Carrie brought that up to my attention, I appreciate that. Would they like to do their presentation? Or would anybody like to speak before we go to commission?
It appears Brian is registered for this and would like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the Plan Commission. Have I been unmuted again?
Yes.
Thank you. This is Attorney Brian Randall of Davis and Keelthau, 111 East Kilbourne, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, here on behalf of the applicant, HSA Commercial Real Estate, which does own this particular site. I do have an even shorter slide presentation, but I find it just helpful to orient the Plan Commission. If I can be allowed to share my screen, I'm happy to go through that. Carrie did a good job with her summary, but there are just a couple other things. All right.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that.
Bless you.
Thank you.
I didn't realize he actually gave me the controls for my video too. So good to see you all. The application before you tonight is we have several applications, and I know that we just called the first one, which is 150 West Oakview Parkway, and it's the conditional use. So I'll address that briefly. Our project team on this, HSA Commercial, Eric Ogden is the principal on this project. Werner Brisky of Partners in Design, who's designed a number of these buildings for HSA. Adam Arts with Pinnacle Engineering Group. And on this one, my colleague Katie Hampel has been assisting me with another building in the Oakview Business Park. Right here is a screen grab of the overall Oakview Business Park layout. Not all of these sites are owned by HSA, but it was developed by Wis Park. A number of other very successful developments have occurred in the area. HSA kind of is right down the spine of Oakview here in the middle. The first building that HSA developed actually was originally approved by MSI General, lot 17, right on Howell. We're now talking about lots 18, 19 as they're known, or 150 West Oakview Parkway. And later on, we'll talk about lots 8 and 9, also owned by HSA, and we're on the agenda for those. This is related to the conditional use request, as was introduced with the agenda item and by the mayor and with Carrie. For these types of tenants that speculatively might be here, the freight terminal code definitions sometimes can kick in. Indeed, there are a variety of permitted uses in the M1 manufacturing district zoning and the PUD that we could work with as a permitted use, but we just know the way the zoning code is structured, there have been times where the CUP for freight terminal is needed. And so with a building like this that is on spec, but it's anticipated to be leased up and filled very quickly because of the success in the area and HSA's success with these types of buildings, we're seeking the CUP this evening. The particulars on that are 131,000 square foot building. Carrie already summarized the truck parking and the employee parking, the vehicle parking, I should say. Importantly, we're separating that with the truck and the trailer and the loading facilities on the north, and then the vehicle parking on the south, again, shown on that site plan, but we do have full circulation on the site. As you can see, there is a loop connection on the far west, and we're coming in off of the cul-de-sac. We are seeking the parking modification that may be more part of the next agenda item, but it simply is because HSA's experience in developing buildings like this, we know that there's a sweet spot of parking that we need to provide on site. We also know that it might hamstring us a little bit if we have a tenant that comes in that needs more parking. We'll just try and buy another site and locate them somewhere else. So we know that this kind of sets the parameters, both in the building size that we're presenting and the overall operations, as well as that vehicle parking. But knowing with the industry experience that we have and what's in demand for the market, we think this strikes the right balance. This one is more oriented toward the next item, the plan review. And the final thing I'll speak to is just the future steps, the top of this slide. For lots 18, 19, we have the conditions, the CUP, we still would need conditions and restrictions. And so I will punch my frequent flyer ticket and be back on April 13th. And that's also part of the reason with my earlier agenda item, the HSA team, even though I introduced everyone on that earlier slide, they asked me to cover this presentation since I was already here before you tonight. Certainly happy to answer questions on the CUP at this point and beyond with the site and building plan item next, and then with lots 8 and 9 at the appropriate times.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Tom, is there anyone else wishing to speak, or Brian, anybody from your team?
I don't anticipate Tom's going to say there's anyone from the team. As indicated, I was prepared for the presentation, but we will have more of them for the April 13th session and beyond as needed. But we've been working with staff, as I've said before, on a pre-application basis. These buildings are ones that HSA has developed in the past. The Plan Commission may also be familiar with 610 West Rawson Avenue. That's not in the Oakview Business Park, but it's another very similar building, both in quality and in overall operations that HSA has already in the city.
Great, thank you, Brian. Tom, is there any residents, anybody else wishing to speak?
There is nobody registered, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We will go to commission. Christine, would you start us off, please?
Yes, I would like, I have a question. So I know currently on Oakwood, the only trucking is from the gas company. Would this increase or have trucking increasing on Oakwood, especially west from the railroad? It's a heavy residential area, so I'm not sure how is the traffic gonna maneuver that.
We did do a traffic impact analysis, and Matt, maybe you can help us out on that one. You still with us?
Yeah,
I know you're in your car. It's not the most comfortable place to do a meeting, but thanks.
yes, I'm here. Traffic analysis and design for the commissioners did update the traffic impact analysis for this business park. One of our concerns, obviously out of the commission and out of engineering, was the change in the original identification of what the uses were for the lots. So they have updated the impact analysis with identifying the lots that have been already developed and what future lots are going to be. These two items that we'll be speaking about tonight are identified as warehouse and trucking or freight. To be more specific about your question, Commissioner Hanna, they don't directly, state which way they're going to go. I am assuming at this point, being at the exit on Howell Avenue at Elm, that would be their point of entry and point of exit, and not driving through the entire park to go up to Oakwood. I mean, I think they're just going to follow GPS and use that route. that could be a further discussion with the engineering design team that did the TIA. But in my opinion, and what I've seen out there, the trucks that are closer to that point of exit and entry of that park tend to use that one off of Howell.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So I guess and I live on Oakwood, so I kind of observe and my kids play in the front yard a lot. My concern is, and other neighbors I've talked to, even though Oakwood is just for the gas company to use for trucks, it has been used by FedEx, not delivery, FedEx, like big WB36 and all of those. So in addition to this new industrial building and having more trucks coming in, yes, they are allowed to use Howell Avenue or 27 or any other trucking routes. Sometimes they just take the shortcut and use Oakwood. So I just want to make sure when you're doing those TIAs and maybe further meetings with those companies that we ensure that they don't use Oakwood. And if there is any other ways to derail them from doing that, any geometry to the entrances from discouraging them from using Oakwood, that would be the preference of the residents around this area.
No, understood. I think we've had this discussion quite a bit. It's PD's been out there, and yeah, we need businesses to be responsible, and we've communicated that to them regularly throughout the year. So we still get those that don't pay attention, but if police are there, they will cite them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is that it, Christine?
Yes, that's it for me.
Okay, Matt, anything else to add?
No, I have nothing. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Dawn?
Nothing for me.
Okay, Greg?
No concerns or questions. Thank you.
Chris?
My question is for Carrie about the parking. Carrie, you said there about, did you say 50? I'm trying to clarify how many parking spots they're short.
It's roughly 50.
50. So that's, I have a bit of a concern for that. Again, we don't know who the tenant's going to be, but how do you come up with 50 more parking spaces unless we don't talk about it right now? So what, any suggestions?
Well, the 150 employees on site at any given shift is probably a very high estimate at this point, especially when we do not know what the tenant uses are, as you mentioned. So I don't think that staff has much of a concern. The code probably requires more than would be necessary for these particular uses. It would be up to the landowner and or their management company to ensure that there's sufficient parking for their tenants.
Thanks, you answered my question.
Okay, Don?
I have no questions.
Fred?
Yeah, I have a little question about the traffic flow on Howell Avenue. With the addition of trucks coming out onto Howell, plus that subdivision development just south of there on the east side of Howell, I can see some potential problems with that intersection right there.
Mayor, I can speak on that.
Yeah, I'm picturing it. We're talking about the mod homes and the subdivision off of Elm there, correct?
I think Commissioner Seifert is speaking of the intersection with Elm
Right.
and Howell Avenue. In the TIA, it was identified as an improvement once the entire business park is developed and the old, I want to say it's Deepert farm, the in-lot there that's being surrounded by the Oakview Business Park. Once that is all developed, that's when the warrants and needs for a signalized intersection is warranted at that location. And at that point, we'd have to, obviously move forward on whoever would be responsible to install that. The TIA did include Oakview condos, that residential development that's being built right now to the south. It did include FedEx. It included all the improvements there. So this kind of encompassed the entire area and all the background traffic that's already there in their thing. There was really no improvements other than that traffic signal that was warranted at this time.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
Okay, is that it, Fred?
That does it for me.
Okay, Chauncey?
All my questions were answered. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, everybody pretty much hit on the topics. I was gonna question on anything. I don't know where fire would have a concern, but I will ask. Assistant Chief Havey, anything from you?
Good evening again, Mayor. No, we have no concerns on this project.
Okay. With that, we'll entertain a motion then.
Guzikowski makes a motion that the Plan Commission recommends that the Common Council approves a conditional use permit for the freight yard terminal transshipment depot facilities within the proposed multi-tenant building on the property at 150 West Oakwood Parkway after a public hearing and subject to conditions and restrictions that will be prepared for the Plan Commission's review at the next meeting.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call, starting with Commissioner Seifert.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Hannah, I.
Sullivan, aye.
Carrillo, I.
Lorik, aye.
Bukevich, aye.
Guzikowski, aye.
Ladani, aye.
Okay. Item E, it's plan review, site building and related plans submitted by Eric Ogden, HSA, commercial real estate for a multi-tenant industrial building on a property at 150 West Oakview Parkway. Commissioners, you're pretty familiar with this one, having just talked about it. So Carrie?
Yep, if we stay on this property, we'll keep talking about the building itself. So it's a 131,227 square foot multi-tenant industrial building with up to 4 tenants that can be accommodated, although, like we said, none have been announced at this time. We have setbacks that are all met with the building and the parking itself. Accesses, there are 2 separated, as we mentioned previously. Trucks will be using the northern access point and all passenger vehicles will be using the southern access point. 125 stalls that were just approved, 15 loading docks and 2 drive-in doors on the north, and 37 semi-trailer or tractor parking stalls on the north as well. So we talked about the minimum parking requirements, and this is what's required per code. And we already had discussed that as part of the modification request, there may be significantly fewer employees that are on site at any one time. There could be changeovers. So the 176 parking stalls that may be required as part of the code are probably too many. And thank you to the Plan Commission for considering that modification request as part of the conditional use permit. Turning to the landscape plans for the property, we're going to take it in 3 different sections. The first section is in the northwest corner. So that is proposed to screen this property from interior properties within Oakview Business Park, as well as Marty Ann Park, which is actually a little bit further west than this. There's a parcel in between. And then a parcel to the north, but again, there's a portion of the parcel, I think it's for utility purposes, that is between this particular parcel and the agricultural parcel that is not part of Oakview Business Park to the north. We do have screening of the parking stalls and of the docks themselves, as well as some plantings at the building level. There's one transformer that you can just barely see in this landscape island here. That's also proposed to be screened. It will likely not be seen from the road unless you're coming directly in from Oakview Parkway. This is the landscaping for screening purposes for that parking area. This is providing screening to the south. There's an undeveloped parcel that is just south of this one. Also interior to the Oakview Business Park. Landscape islands also provide some shade trees. There's the continuation of the foundation plantings for the building itself. And then in the yellow box on the right, that is showing there's a large kind of landscape area. It's not necessarily an island because it's right by the entryways to the building, as seen from Oakview Parkway. There may be a future monument sign in this area, so this would be kind of that large plaza area that's going to be landscaped as the entryway. Building itself is proposed to be constructed with precast concrete in 3 different shades as shown on the screen. Sorry, I just lost my spot here. There we go. It wasn't clear exactly from the elevations whether or not each of the entryways had canopies. If they do not, staff highly recommends incorporating those canopies into those tenant entrances. While there are no rooftop mechanical units proposed in these elevations, they would be required to be screened either by the parapets themselves or through screening mechanisms as approved by the Department of Community Development. This is the southern entryway. This is where most of the employees and any visitors would be entering. On the west here, this is kind of a wraparound treatment for that corner tenant. This will be facing interior to Oakview Business Park. And the elevation on the north showing those loading dock areas. Just want to clarify one thing with the landscape plans. We do need to have all of the heights of the plants at installation and maturity, kind of a standard condition of approval there. And also there were no signs that were a part of this approval for this evening. So a master sign plan will be required in the future, showing all of those proposed tenant space signage, as well as the monument sign. One final thing, there was no dumpster enclosure that was included as part of these plans. So if there is going to be a dumpster enclosure, perhaps in the loading dock area, we would need to have those details included as part of the plans prior to permitting. With that, there is a suggested motion 1 of 2 on the screen for approval. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Tom is the applicant with us. Is there anybody wishing to speak? So if they are, please let them go before commission.
Sure, the applicant is here, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the Planning Commission. This is Attorney Brian Randall again of Davis and Kielthau, 111 East Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee 53202. Nothing officially to add by way of the presentation because we mostly covered it in the last one, so I don't need to toggle to my other screen. Just on this particular screen though, with the conditions proposed by staff, I think we can work through them all and meet them all. I appreciate for example, the sign program, the master sign plan. If we have more than one tenant, then yes, we're probably going to need that, but we don't yet know. So we'll come back to that if we end up having a multi-tenant building here. And just as Carrie explained on the dumpster enclosure screening, some of our tenants we found have either roll-offs that roll out, or closed compactors. And so they may not have the need for an exterior dumpster, but as staff has indicated, if the condition is written in a way that we will meet that at permitting when and if our tenants need that, then we'll address it that way. So all of the staff conditions, and I know the others are coming up now on the screen, we can work with, and we appreciate the opportunity to just satisfy those conditions going forward.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I would imagine Brian was the only one that registered in. I don't think we have any residents for this, but just double check.
Correct, Mr. Mayor. There are no residents registered for this.
Okay, we'll go to commission, starting with Commissioner Chandler.
I do have a question for the applicant. My first question is in regards to what Carrie identified about the entrance coverings. Can you share details about those coverings, if they exist, and what they would be?
Thank you. I don't think they exist on the building as it's proposed, and before you, I was zooming in on those plans myself. I think if we could, we can certainly work with the architect and with staff as a follow-up. I understand the recommendation staff made. The building as presented is to have kind of a clean look and focus on those entry points, or excuse me, the corners with the glazing. But I understand with the canopies, there might be a practical reason for that, a night like tonight where there's a lot of rain happening and otherwise. So we can certainly work on that coming back with staff, but in blowing up the plans, I did not see that they were defined on the building as proposed. So the answer is I don't think they exist, but that's also partly because we don't know where the tenant entrances would be, given again that it's a spec building.
Okay, and then my next question is in regards to the flow of traffic on the site. Can you provide information of how the trucks will flow on the site, and then the employees coming with their vehicles along with the pedestrian walks?
Sure, and I appreciate Carrie going back to the site plan because it really shows the situation even better than I can describe. So the cul-de-sac there in the lower right is where all vehicles will come in on the public roadways. Trucks primarily will go then northbound or northwest, if you will, along that drive aisle and to the north side of the site, which is where the loading docks are and the outdoor parking spaces are. And there also is a drive-in option for this building per the design, but that's going, as you can see with the arrow there, to the north on the site. Back to the cul-de-sac, though, most vehicles, employee vehicles, visitors, in particular the way the building is oriented, and we'll have wayfinding signage as well, they would then, instead of going to the right, they would turn left to drive directly west onto the site, which is the south side of our site, where all of those double stack parking stalls are and the front entrances, if you will, for the building would be. And then you can see again on the west of the site, those two fields are connected, but primarily that would be for emergency vehicles and some regular vehicles to drive along the west. We do not anticipate, with the types of tenants we would have in the routine operations, that trucks would go from the loading dock area and loop around our site in that fashion. Most truckers go the most direct route, and so they would again go back out on the north side, proceed to the east to that cul-de-sac.
Okay, and then could you also provide information about the walks or the walkways for the pedestrians or the employees?
Yes, I know you asked that and I didn't just address that. So I'm not sure if the city has a sidewalk system in the area, but we would be able to connect into that. And I think primarily on the south for where the vehicle access point would be, rather than try to have pedestrians feel comfortable and be safe going to the north. It's where the arrow would be a walkway or a pedestrian travel route could be on the south, because again, vehicles are much less dangerous, if you will, than large trucks, and that would be the preferred accommodation that we would have.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Fred?
No questions at this time.
Don?
No questions.
Chris?
No questions for me either.
Greg?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Dawn?
No questions for me.
Matt?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Christine?
Just one question, and this is just a general question. With all this beautiful and well thought of landscaping, do we have a landscaping contract to kind of ensure that the owner of the property will keep maintaining this to contain the screening, or this is just up to them?
Carrie, you want to take that one, or you want me to take a stab at it?
Well, I can tell you that anything that is approved as part of the Plan Commission approval is intended and required to be maintained as approved. So if there were ever any concerns about removal of landscaping and the lack of replacement in kind, there would be enforcement action that could possibly occur. There's also the requirement that prior to occupancy, we have landscaping that must be installed. before our department will sign off on that final occupancy. Maintenance wise, there is there's language within any development agreement, which probably wouldn't necessarily pertain to this particular property because there's no public infrastructure, but for the park itself, there was a requirement for landscaping to be in within a certain time frame and maintained. And we do require that with all landscaping, there's something built into the plans for establishment and maintenance for, I think it's 1 year to 3 years, to ensure that the landscaping has time to establish itself. If there's ever any concern in the future with regard to, let's say, you know, knock on wood, this doesn't happen, but if we get into a pest situation where trees are affected and they need to be cut down, we'd work with the applicant to ensure that the intent of the landscape plan is maintained.
Okay, that answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. I do not have any questions. I will ask Fire Assistant Chief Havey, any concerns from fire accessing the sides, particularly the west side of the building? Does that, I'm sure it's plenty wide enough for your equipment, but any concerns?
Yeah, we were able to look at the proposed plant site and have no concerns on the access. Because of the trucking route on that northern side, again, we feel that our vehicles are able to maneuver through that side of it, and moving around through on the west side and back out the south, we really don't have too many concerns.
Okay, thank you very much. And the rest of my questions were addressed, dumpsters, things of that nature. So thank you all. With that, if there's nothing further, we'll do a motion.
Guzikowski makes a motion that the Plan Commission approves the site and building plans submitted by Eric Ogden, Oak Creek Industrial LLC for the property at 150 West Oakwood Parkway with the following conditions. 1, that all relevant code requirements are in effect. 2, that the plans are revised to include locations for all mechanicals, transformers, and utilities. All mechanical equipment, transformers, utility boxes, ground, building, and rooftop shall be screened from view. And 3, that the landscape plans be revised to include heights of all screening plants at installation and maturity. 4, that the plans are revised to include details for the proposed trash enclosures. 5, that the detailed master sign plan is reviewed and approved by the Plan Commission prior to submission for sign permit applications. 6, that all detailed revised plans are submitted in digital format to the Department of Community Development prior to submission for permit applications.
Oracle second.
Okay. Roll call starting with Commissioner Chandler.
Chandler, aye.
Anna, aye.
Sullivan, aye.
Grillo, aye.
Lorik, aye.
Kavich, aye.
Guzikowski, aye.
Ladani, aye.
Peepers, aye.
Okay. And item 6F, consideration of a conditional use permit, again submitted by Eric Ogden, HSA Commercial Real Estate. This is for a freight yard, freight terminal, transshipment depot. This time it's on the properties at 10551 South Oakview Parkway. So Carrie?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is essentially the exact same request, just on a different parcel within Oakview Business Park. Site and building plans are forthcoming probably in the next month or two. This is a conceptual site plan showing the proposed building on the property. To the south here is actually South Oakview Parkway, so this is oriented a little bit odd. Potential uses, same as the other location, like industrial, manufacturing, and warehouse. Also that distribution component, which is why we're requesting the conditional use permit. No tenants announced, but again, up to 4 can be accommodated by the building, which is approximately 156,000 square feet at this point. That may change slightly based on some programming for the building. 22 loading docks at this time with potential drive-in doors at either end, 12 stalls for parking of trailers in between those docks, similar to the other location. And similar to the other location, a large number of employees, but that's probably an overestimate at this point. There are 36 trailer stalls that are located on the west and 113 stalls provided on the east. Again, there's a modification request, understanding that we do not have specific tenants announced. We do not know the specific number of employees that are anticipated. We don't know the specific shifts. We are anticipating 24/7 operations as with the other location. And if we go by what the code says with the maximum amount, that's why we have the modification request, because there would be well in excess of 113 parking stalls required. Again, staff have no concerns with the proposed number of stalls. It will be up to the landowner and their management company to ensure that all of their tenants' needs are met. This site, as you can see, is a bit tight in terms of additional parking stalls that could be accommodated at a future date. So it will be, again, something that will have to be programmed into the overall site plans that would be before the Plan Commission at a later date. There is a suggested motion for approval on the screen for Plan Commission consideration. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. And Tom, would you like to see if Brian would like to present on this one?
Sure.
I think he just left me active, Mr. Mayor, so.
Oh, okay. You know what? You're earning your money tonight, Brian, that's for sure.
Well, I was going to say your next agenda item, you all will earn the break from Brian because that's what's next. Attorney Brian Randall of Davis and Keelthau, 111 East Kilbourne, Milwaukee, 53202. Here on behalf of the applicant, HSA Commercial Real Estate. If you may remember from my slides, I don't need to bring them back, but the project team on this, of course, includes HSA. We have Partners in Design as the building architect, as well as Pinnacle Engineering Group on the civil package. And my colleague Katie Hampel has been working with me as we pulled all this together. Although on this one, as Carrie explained, admittedly, we're not as far along in the construction and leasing process to bring the full site and building plan package before you. So it is just the conditional use permit request. But out of respect for everyone's time and to be efficient, staff, of course, spends time on all of these, as well as the Plan Commission and ultimately the Common Council on a conditional use. We wanted to bring this package forward together. Also because HSA has invested in the city, does own these sites already. And we obviously, having told you that, are very bullish about the city of Oak Creek and know what the market can bring. And so from HSA's standpoint, it's just a matter of time before a building like this can be built. Again, on spec, we're not exactly sure who the tenants would be. So to make sure we are nimble and can react to what the market may bring us, we're requesting the conditional use permit for a potential freight user, although any of those M1 permitted uses could be accommodated by this building as well. I don't have anything else to add other than we can answer questions, but the timetable again is different on this one. So it's just the conditional use, although in the package, where representative drawings, it would be a concrete precast building, the same overall presentation, although some design differences that reflect the site. And of course, site-specific modifications on the site plan, but that would all be the future application that we'll bring forward tonight. However, the conditional use request and the parking modification, again, we don't want to overbuild parking that we don't think we'll need. And we recognize that it may be a limitation for us, but one that we can work with given HSA's experience. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members of the Plan Commission.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Tom, is there anyone besides Mr. Randall?
There is nobody registered, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. We will go to the commission then, starting with Commissioner Hannah.
I have no question. Thank you.
Matt,
I have no questions.
Dawn,
Nothing for me.
Greg,
Nothing from me, thank you.
okay, Chris,
Nothing for me. Thank you for asking.
Don,
No questions.
Fred,
No questions.
and Chauncey.
No questions for me.
No, I have nothing either. Pretty standard. We've pretty much covered much of this. So I will, out of respect, Assistant Chief Havey, anything out of fire. And I know it's, it's subject to change because it's just a drawing as of right now.
Yeah, correct. I've already received some revised drawings today that I'll have to review.
Okay, great. Okay, motion, please.
Seifert moves that the planning commission recommends that the common council approves a condition use permit for freight yard, freight terminal, transshipment depot facility within the property's multi-tenant building on the property at 101 or 10551 South Oakview Parkway after a public hearing and subject to conditions and restrictions will be prepared for the planning commission's review at the next meeting, April 13th, 2021.
Oracle second.
Roll call, starting with Commissioner Hannah.
Hannah, I.
Sullivan, I.
Perillo, I.
Laura, aye.
Kavich, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Any problems with my button? Ladani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Brian, thank you for the time and presentations. Appreciate it if you're still on. At this time, we are going to go over the zoning code update discussion. I think Carrie kind of warned you last time, 2 weeks ago, this was going to be a longer agenda. Appreciate you guys and ladies hanging in there, but we will take a 5-minute break. So if you need something, glass of water, or need the restroom, now's your opportunity. So I will see you in 5. I got 7:50, so 7:55, please. All right, as soon as I get the signal from Carrie, we'll take off and we'll have a discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just checking on something real quick. I'm not entirely certain that our consultant from HLA was able to register, so
Oh,
one moment.
that would be a problem.
Gary, I do have a Jackie Wells raising their hand right now as an attendee.
I think that's
Perfect.
our,
Hi, Jackie. Sorry. All right. Just a request if you could promote her to a presenter, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Good evening, everybody.
hi, Jackie.
Are we all set to get started?
Ready to go.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for having me again in front of you. So you'll remember we've met 3 times so far to go through the draft of sections of the new zoning code. So in August to go through Articles 2 through 4, and then in December and January to go through Articles 5 through 9. So tonight we're going to bring back a couple of discussion items that we talked about during our first 3 presentations, just to get further clarification and direction from you all about the discussion and the consensus points that we brought to you previously. So we're going to have continued discussions on the items listed here. And then after we get through sort of what we had on our list, we wanted to double check with you all if there was anything additional we wanted to discuss, maybe something that didn't make this list that you really wanted to revisit. And then we'll have a discussion on next steps. So jumping right in on our continued discussion, our first topic is accessory buildings. So the first thing we wanted to confirm with you all is about the maximum size of accessory buildings and if what we have proposed is appropriate in Oak Creek. So what we've proposed is that on lots less than or equal to ½ an acre, the accessory building size is a maximum of 1,000 square feet or 75% of the livable area of the principal building, whichever is less. So if you have a smaller lot with a smaller home, you wouldn't be permitted to have the full 1,000 square feet. But if you have a larger lot with a larger home, you would be able to have the maximum size of the accessory building. And then for lots greater than ½ acre, you would have 1,200 square feet as that maximum. And just for a point of reference, a typical 2-car garage is just under 700 square feet. So just to give you an idea of what 1,000 square feet really is, a 2-car garage just under 700 square feet. So any thoughts or feedback on the maximum size of accessory buildings?
No, not at this time.
All right.
At least from me.
And please, if I'm moving too quickly and you want to get back to something, if I kind of rush through it, always feel free to jump in and let me know we need to go backwards. But
Jackie,
our next point here.
Jackie, just to kind of close that one out, remember we do allow up to 2 accessory buildings per lot. So I mean, that's quite a bit of accessory building, and one of the reasons why we don't make them bigger and more, I guess, allow more of them is because these things do tend to, over time, turn into, enforcement issues with respect to possible home businesses and what have you. So, and for a residential use of the property, I think that those are actually quite generous in terms of what's allowed.
Doug, that's a really good point. Would it be 1,000? Let's say they had 2 accessory buildings. Would it be a total of 1,000 square foot? So if a person had a small shed, a small shed and maybe a 1-car garage, it could go up to 1,000 square feet combined, or is it per dwelling unit? I don't know.
That's actually a really good question. I don't know the answer to that.
The way that the text is written currently is it would be 1,000 square feet per accessory building.
Ooh. Yeah, to Doug's point, that's a lot.
In other communities that we've worked in, we've seen typically the maximum for accessory buildings would be right around 700 square feet, that 2-car garage size. Or if it's a higher number, you would only be allowed the one, or that would be an aggregate amount for 2 separate buildings.
And
I think
Jackie,
that-
this is
Oh, go
Carrie.
ahead.
I believe we had at one point entertained a cumulative maximum for all accessory buildings. And it was just a maximum of one size that could not exceed 1,000 square feet or 75%, 1,200 square feet or 75%, but there would still be a cumulative maximum. Is that something that the Plan Commission still wants to entertain?
Commissioners, you want to weigh in? I think I would be in favor of that.
I agree. I'd be in favor of a cumulative maximum.
Any others?
I will just note that there is still something within code that exempts accessory structures that are 120 square feet or less from obtaining building permits. So that might be slightly difficult to determine a cumulative maximum if we exempt those structures moving forward, but that is something to also consider.
Carrie, can you please repeat that?
Sure, we currently exempt from permitting requirements structures that are 120 square feet or less. If we are proposing to maintain that, the cumulative accessory structure or accessory building, square footage might be slightly difficult to determine, but we're talking about 120 square feet of margin of error, if you will.
And Carrie, I believe we're handling accessory structures that don't require a building permit separately than accessory buildings, which would. So that would likely not fall under this accessory buildings definition, but would be counted towards your accessory structure limit of 2 per, I believe it's 2 per lot.
We do have sheds that would be 120 square feet or less. So I don't want to necessarily say just a structure because it could be a fully enclosed building.
Okay. So it sounds like the direction we want to move in is to have a cumulative total of 1,000 square feet or 75% of the livable area for lots that are less than or equal to half an acre. And then on lots greater than a half acre, the maximum would be 1,200 square feet or 75% of the livable area, cumulative maximum for all accessory buildings on a lot.
I would say that's the direction.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so our second point here for accessory buildings is to determine whether accessory buildings that are located in rear yards should be required to connect to driveways or alleys. So this is not currently a requirement, but was something that was discussed during our December meeting, or I believe it was our December meeting about, garages or other types of sheds that might be storing vehicles or other type of recreational equipment that are not directly connected to driveways or alleys.
And what we find or have found is that in those instances where people have built a first or second accessory building in the backyard, in many cases, they do not have access to the driveway. And in some cases, they either drive around on their or their neighbor's property, or in some cases they have garage doors, which allow them to pull through. Again, this is a situation where we found that this just invites the opportunity to either have a home occupation that's not supported by code and invites the use of your neighbor's property as essentially as a driveway for your building. So staff brought this up, and staff has advised that accessory buildings, and again, we're not talking about the sheds. We're talking about the 2-car garages or things of that, and pole buildings have access to a driveway or an alley or something of that nature, just so that we avoid a situation where, and this actually happens, where you ask the person, well, how do you get back to that? Oh, I just drive on my neighbor's property. Well, that's not ideal, and it's really in those situations as well, it kind of puts that building out of sight, and there's a temptation to utilize that for things that perhaps shouldn't be taking place on those residential properties. So if we go that route, and I think we are advocating that we do, we should probably put a size limitation in there so everyone who puts up a garden shed doesn't have to have it accessed through their driveway.
I'd like
Is
to make a
there,
comment.
Carrie or Doug, would this be what similar to what's been happening on Gray's Lane with the issue with the size of the trail, what they're storing in the back, Doug?
Not necessarily. Chris, this is more so for people who want to build a first or second accessory building. I mean, there's still going to be rules with respect to where you can store vehicles and RVs and that nature. That's elsewhere in the code, but this really has to deal with the buildings themselves.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
is there a way to maybe focus on the use of the building versus the size? I understand if it's like a motor vehicle that it's storing, you want it attached to a driveway and things like that, but I guess I don't know how big somebody would build a shed, but if all they're storing is outdoor equipment or lawn care equipment or whatever the case may be, I don't know that necessarily needs to be attached to a driveway. So versus size, could you, I guess, differentiate them by use
I
in
think
the
that would
code?
be, I'm sorry. I think that'd be difficult in practice, but I think the way you accomplish that, Alderman, is by, again, picking that square footage that, I mean, typically you're not going to build a garden shed in a residential context that's, the size of a 2-car garage. So, I mean, I think it's probably the way to go is to find that right threshold where it ceases becoming, something for storage of your garden equipment, and it starts to become, you're parking, storing RVs for people, or you're setting up shop, an auto shop back there, or, things that probably shouldn't be happening in residential districts.
Alderman
Okay.
Lorik, this is Carrie. This is actually something that Jackie and I had spoken about at our last phone call. And the difficulty in determining whether or not it's square footage versus number versus use is you're kind of trying to limit something that is just a structure. In other words, we don't always have exactly what people are going to be using these accessory structures for. They could say, yes, I'm storing all of my garden equipment in it, and then there's a vehicle in it. It doesn't really matter. And if it's a certain size, what size do you pick? Do you say anything larger than a single car garage has to be attached or has to be connected? And that's kind of the give and take that you have when requiring the connection.
Okay,
Carrie,
thank you.
this is Christine. So this is going to be done via permit when they have or add those accessory buildings, or this is something they can just add on their own and then be required to add drivers or connect to drivers and or alleys?
I would imagine that it would have to be part of the permit, at least how they're going to connect to it, because if this is going to be a requirement, you need to prove that you have access to it.
Correct. And this is where I'm getting. So if we have that permit application, and I'm guessing in the application, I've never done one, so I don't know. You have to specify what is the use of that accessory building so it doesn't have any gas or any flammable container that may cause harm to neighbors. So I think it's part of the permit application to specify what is the need or the usage of that accessory building.
Not exactly, no. If you're requesting a shed, we don't ask what you're storing in the shed.
Okay.
I also see enforcement difficulties stemming from that. If someone in their building permit application said they were going to be storing garden equipment and then, you know, neighbors complain that it's actually being used as a garage, it would be difficult to enforce that.
See, I know what you're saying, Jackie and Carrie, but see, and I'm gonna play the devil advocate here. So if I say, no, I'm just gonna use it for lawnmower, I'm just gonna use it for my snow removal equipment, whatever that may be. And therefore I don't need to connect to an alley or a driveway if it's not based on size. Then I can say that, and coming later in a week or so, I just add or store my cars inside. See, it's just, we have to be consistent and we have to be careful how to approach this so we don't have people take advantage of that system.
And that may be where the size comes in. And that's why I suggested anything more than a single car garage in terms of size. And I say single car garage because I don't have the square footage in front of me right now. If we have anything larger than that, it's almost a foregone conclusion, although an assumption, that vehicles are going to be stored within it if it's any larger.
I agree.
And this is Chelsea. Is there a concern about other motorized items such as a motorcycle, which wouldn't need as much space as a single car garage?
No, I don't think so. Speaking personally, I mean, everyone's going to have their riding lawnmower. You know, they might have a motorcycle they're storing for the winter. They might have a four-wheeler or something like that. I mean, that's not. I don't think that's what we're trying to get at here. We're just trying to make sure that, I mean, if you're building, you know, a garage, a building that's specifically intended to store vehicles, that those vehicles have a path out to a public street or an alley. So I guess without getting into too much detail on this one, I mean, I would advocate for, you know, finding that right size, whether it's, you know, as Carrie said, the one car garage would be typically, you know, what's that? You know, I'd say probably more than 240, although, you know, there's some pretty big garden sheds out there that might rise to that level. So we'll just have to find out what the right number is. But I think I'd be mainly concerned in getting the Plan Commission's consensus on whether or not that requirement should be in there. You know, we can figure out what the right number is as we move forward.
Would make sense, you know. Guess it all depends on how the lot's situated, all the same too.
A quick question, because there are comments about should it be the type of item being stored or the size of the what is being built, that building. Is it possible to identify certain requirements for that particular person's property? Instead of saying a building is a certain size, or can you say that depending on what's stored there, that you can only access your own property when entering or exiting that accessory building?
You know, I get where you're going with that, but I think it's, as Commissioner Hanna suggested, that's problematic in the sense that not everyone's going to be truthful and on their applications, and B, things change. So what you store today may not be what you store tomorrow, and the city has no way of verifying that short of, you know, either taking your word for it or inspecting it, which we typically wouldn't do. I think having something just as black and white and tangible as square footage is the right way of going about doing that, because that's not going to change.
That's a good point. I would agree with that. Over time, yeah, needs change.
Okay, so it sounds like we have some general consensus that yes, accessory buildings over a certain size should be connected to a driveway or an alley. I will work with Carrie and Doug to figure out exactly what that threshold of square footage should be. And then when we bring back the full draft to you all, we can be sure to highlight what that number is that we've landed on.
Another quick question. So if this item, this accessory building is located in the back, and there is no alley in the back and only the driveway is in the front. So the recommendation for someone would be to connect their front driveway to the rear. Am I understanding this correctly?
No, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so moving on to our next topic. So during one of our Plan Commission workshops, we had discussed food trucks in the sense that they would be temporary uses in parking lots. And you all had brought up that there may be a desire for a more permanent location where food trucks could come and park. So we did a lot of research and came up with some food truck park standards. So this would be an area that would be a permanent location where food trucks could come and go and be sort of a central location for them in the city. So this would be a permanent use. And here in front of you are the proposed use standards that would be applied to these food truck parks. So this is shortened down so it fits on the slide. But generally it is limiting things like the distance between trucks, requiring seating and shade elements, requiring that permanent ADA compliant restrooms and other types of typical accessory uses you would have with any type of business would be provided as well. And then a separation requirement from brick and mortar restaurants of 500 feet. So any questions or comments on how we addressed the food truck parks, or anything that you think we might have missed?
So Jackie, this is
when we had done our research and developed these use.
Can you hear me? You were cutting off.
Oh, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so I'm not sure if those were revised post or prior to the COVID virtual world. So have this been revised to incorporate the latest CDC recommendation? What, like 6 feet apart, or what type of approaches the food truck visitors should be taking? So the spaces between the food trucks, the restrooms, the desanitizing, the cleaning, all of those type of things?
That is a great question. So the zoning ordinance, we haven't made any major changes to the use specific standards included in the zoning ordinance that would really be to address the CDC guidelines for the current COVID-19 pandemic. So just like any other business, the food truck parks would need, just like any restaurant business would have to comply with those state standards for how to run and be open. So the separation, the social distancing, all of the cleaning and the hygiene that would be in addition to what is just typical and normal. That would be something that would be handled outside of the zoning ordinance. Of course, there would be health department guidelines, guidelines from the state and from the federal government, of course, would have to be followed. But for the zoning ordinance itself,
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, you're not able to hear me. I'm not coming through.
Now you are.
Yes, you were cutting off, Jackie.
Oh, I apologize. Let me make sure my internet connection is stable. Were you able to hear the explanation as to why we did not include any sort of COVID guidelines within these use standards?
You are correct not to use it because of this is like standard codes that going to be used from now and post-pandemic. It's just my concern is, and I'm totally 100% assuming if this is going to be implemented maybe this upcoming summer or something, and we're going to be still in the pandemic. So I just want to ensure that the food trucking coming in are still abiding to the CDC guideline and the state guidelines. And maybe we can advise them, not certainly require them to follow those requirements. So it's just something from the city to come for those food truckers to ensure that they follow that.
Yeah, I can interject a little bit. With the farmer's market, I have a set of rules, but with the COVID, I have a whole nother set of rules. So this would probably just be the standard rules. And then with the COVID, they would be put out by the health department. I have a quick question about, now I understand this is parks and this is not just a one-time event or the market or things like that, but I'm not sure that we can have a minimum of 2 permanent restrooms. When we create a park and we're going to look at different areas, we might have to go with rental porta potties, things like that. So, hand washing stations, things like that. So permanent and 2 of them might not be achievable, especially at the beginning.
So definitely understand that permanent restrooms might not be feasible in the beginning phases of the establishment of a food truck park. That could potentially be a condition that's put on the approval of the food truck park, so that could be phased in over time if we wanted to consider that. But I would recommend that there be some type of permanent restroom within time, just to solidify the permanence of the food truck park, rather than it being a parking lot that's used for food trucks. It's really a permanent location, very much intended to be a food truck park.
I also think, Jackie, having the permanent restrooms, especially with the right sanitary and sewer and water feeding tubes, will be good instead of a porta potty that may not be hygienic, especially if it's going to be a permanent site, not just seasonal or something like that. So that will be more hygienic than movable or rentable porta potties.
And I do want to clarify that the permanent restrooms don't have to necessarily be built just for the food truck park. It's the requirement as it's proposed is that it's within 200 feet and made accessible to patrons. So if there was, let's say, a permanent food truck park in near the city hall and then Drexel Town Square, if the city wanted to make the restrooms in the city hall available to the public, then that would be one way to meet this requirement. It doesn't necessarily have to be the food truck park itself building restrooms, but have some sort of agreement with another use to make those restrooms available during the operating hours of the food truck park.
I have a question. This is just in case there's ever a permanent area made just a food truck park, correct? Yes. And we have no proposals. Has anyone come forward that they want to do this, or is this just a result of us talking about it the last time we were talking, correct? So the chances of a food truck being developed all by itself as a food truck park are probably at this point pretty slim, especially by this summer, unless someone comes forward out of the blue and proposes this.
Actually, Don, we did have something, a couple of proposals that sounded kind of like this might be part of, if not the proposal. It never came to fruition, but we have been approached for something that would be similar to a food truck park.
Are you being approached by food trucks saying they'd like to have a spot where they can congregate? Excuse me?
Not necessarily, no. There was the one application that came before the Plan Commission to allow for food trucks to park temporarily while they utilize the kitchen services, and that was on Rawson Avenue. This would be something different. Like I said, the proposal never got any farther than just an inquiry, but we did have, I believe it was
No,
two
Carrie, you're
separate.
cutting out.
All right. Let me see.
Don, I think you're right, though. You're not likely to see a large number of these types of requests. And this is not for an event. This is for someone like on 6th Street. I don't know if you're familiar in kind of the Walker's Point area. There's actually a physical development that's specifically designed for food trucks. And they do have restrooms and they do have hookups. And that's really what this is addressing. This isn't trying to address the special events, or if there's just one or two food trucks that are, have the permission to park in someone's parking lot and sell their wares. This would be for something more permanent.
Right. So that's what I figured. So I don't know how deep we want to dive into this thing. If their research has shown having a either permanent bathrooms available, or if you're going to go as far as develop a park to create permanent bathrooms along with the electrical hookups, I don't have a problem with that. I think what you're going to see probably going forward more and more is just, hey, let's have one at the Drexel Town Square, or this park this weekend is going to be a food truck, one off. I think that's what you see. I could be wrong, Carrie, but that's just my 2 cents.
There are a few that have popped up. There was one that popped up. I'm not sure, Doug, if this is the same one that you mentioned in Milwaukee. Begins with an M. I can't remember the name of it exactly at the moment, but there was an example for that. There may be something that's maybe not necessarily a food truck park as we would envision it, but something in between a food truck park and food stalls or a food hall, something like that. I just know that we were approached at least twice for something that sounded like this is what they were going to be proposing, and it ended up not moving forward. But there were examples in Milwaukee. There were a couple of them that popped up, and they are growing in popularity around the country, but it could be a fad. It's just, I think we were wanting to allow for something like this to potentially locate within the city if it was something that was more than a temporary basis.
I think those standards are fine.
I agree with the standards, and also I've been to many different cities, throughout the country, and food truck parks are very common in a lot of other cities. So I don't know that. And granted, some of them have warmer climates, but they're not they're very common in a lot of places we've visited. So I'm in favor of what you have listed here.
Now, for these parks, should we also include hand washing stations or a certain amount of seating area?
I believe the hand washing stations would be covered under the permanent restroom, since that would of course include the sinks along with the toilets themselves. The amount of seating, I do wonder if maybe a minimum square footage of seating per each food truck may be appropriate, if that's sort of what you're thinking, to make sure that there is adequate room for seating within the park itself. Kind of on the contrary to that, though, I believe any developer of a food truck park would establish the amount of seating that they think would be feasible or desirable for the food truck park, just based on their understanding of the demand for that type of seating, how much is taken to go versus how much is typically eaten there on site. So if the direction is to establish that minimum amount of seating per food truck, we can definitely do that. But I would say leaving that flexibility open to the developer is could also be beneficial for the city.
So is there a way to note that we want to include seating? Maybe not very specific, if I understood you correctly, to not minimize what could be there, but make sure that it's included in the future?
Yeah, so we've included language that a food truck park would be encouraged to create an inviting and attractive aesthetic environment, including seating and shade elements. That language could be strengthened to require seating and shade elements, not necessarily the number or the square footage of seating area, but just that is required as a part of the food truck. The amount could be decided by the developer themselves, or it could stay as an encouragement based on the direction you all give.
Yes, because my interpretation of that is where we had seating is that you're able to have an area for seats that individuals bring to the area, not necessarily having it incorporated into the area.
So more like permanent seating that's a part of the food truck park, not somewhere where someone could bring like a folding chair and sort of have a picnic area.
A little of both would be good.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest that we, recognizing the amount of items on our agenda, and we want to devote as much attention to those as we are to this one. So I'm going to suggest we move on. If that's okay.
Yeah.
But just for clarity, I had an item on the table, so I just want to make sure that item is addressed, because I wasn't clear with what you were saying, Jackie, in regards to the seating and my interpretation of that bullet.
So we could include and clarify the text, say permanent seating, picnic area, and shade elements, if that would help to address your concern.
Yes, please. Thank you.
No problem. Going on to our next topic, RV parking. So this is a topic that we had discussed quite a bit during one of our Plan Commission workshops. Just wanted to touch base back with you all to make sure that we had interpreted your direction correctly and just to clarify a couple points. So first and foremost, just confirming that RVs will continue to be limited to parking on hard paved surfaces. And then our next couple of questions, should RVs parked in rear yards be required to connect to driveways or alleys? So very similar to the accessory building, if the RV is parked in the rear yard, does it need to be connected to a driveway or alley, or can it just be parked in that rear yard area? And then the second question, should parking within the front setback be prohibited altogether? So RV parking in the front setback of a property, should that be prohibited?
So again, just to frame the issue, and we've all seen it during the winter time. People will, bring their RV. If they don't want to store it, they'll park it in their front driveway. Some will actually move it on their side yard. And Carrie, refresh my memory. Are they required right now to be on a hard paved surfaces in side yards? I don't believe that they are, and I could be mistaken, but I don't believe they are. So
I don't know about paved. They do have to be parked on a hard surface, though.
Yeah.
Well,
gravel.
There's a few in my neighborhood that are parked on the grass alongside the side of the house. And I thought zoning came out and said they were okay with that. Now, they're not drivable RVs. These are fifth wheel trailers. Are they considered RVs?
I believe they would be, yes. So I guess, knowing that what we have now is, again, pretty, it allows for a number of options for homeowners. And we certainly don't want to unduly restrict that, but you can see how that impacts the quality of life for the neighbors when you have a major RV that's on your side yard, which is, could be, 2 feet away from your property line. I think that's when we look at parking and RVs and recreational vehicles and other equipment. That's going to be one of the really big areas moving forward where if we implement the new zoning code, that we're apt to find a lot of concerns from residents who've basically done this for decades in many cases. So we just need to be very clear on what the intent of the Plan Commission is with respect to whether we want to allow people to store their RVs, boats, what have you, in their side yards or in their driveways. I mean, we can get some direction from Jackie and her team as to how other communities do that. I suspect that we don't want to prohibit it altogether, but I think from my perspective, I think we'd want to tighten it up as far as, having a setback and, again, identifying that it has to be maybe on a paved surface so that we don't have these instances where, we've got multiple trailers and what have you, parked in side or rear yards. So that's just my thinking. And I know there's a number of different opinions, all of which are valid. And that's why I wanted to bring this back to the Plan Commission for your discussion.
I think it's worthwhile discussion, and I agree with you, Doug. There's people that have been doing this for a number of years, and it would pretty much rock their world if we just changed it all of a sudden. But I don't think asking for hard surfaces is out of line, and the front setbacks be prohibited all the same.
This is Christine. I agree with you, Doug, and I think that having the RVs be continue to be limited to hard paved surfaces. I don't know if you want to specify what hard paved surfaces are, like asphalt or concrete or whatever that may be, because it could be whatever people may identify paved is. So I don't know if you want to specify that or the opposite. It cannot be parked on gravel or grass or whatever that may be. So either way should work.
Yeah, that's a great point, Christine, just because I know that there's instances where people will throw down a few bricks or some gravel and say, well, it's hard surfaced.
Yes,
and that's not the intent.
Exactly, and especially gravel, and if the homes are too close to each other, when trucks or cars are driving, they can cause some tracing on neighborhood properties, and may cause damage. This is the extreme, but this is one of the consequences of that type of surface. I would think the RVs parked in the rear yard should be still connected to either driveways or alleys, just because the right-of-way line between both neighborhood can be very small, or neighbors, I should say, be very small, and they may drive on the neighbor's property line. So that may create some conflicts. So just be careful of how we want to address that. But I think it should be connected to a hard surface as well for them to drive on. Again, as part of, like you said, Doug, it will enhance and maintain the property values of the neighborhood and of the whole Oak Creek community. So it's going to look run down if we let it go however people want. Finally, should parking within the front setback be prohibited altogether? I would say yes, because again, it will impact the property aesthetic and values, and not everybody will maintain the same way. So it's better to prohibit it altogether. I sound a little harsh, but that's my take on this. Thank you.
Fred Siepert, I have a question dealing with the time that you can store boats, trailers, and so forth in your driveway. Is there any time element? I've seen people park race cars that have sat for 2 or 3 years in their driveway. And I'm just wondering, is there a time limit that you would like to set on some of that? A seasonal type thing, or somewhere in that range?
Well, Fred, with respect to automotive vehicles, I mean, that'd be tough because driveways in many cases are designed for that purpose. But how you accomplish that is, and how we accomplish it right now, is they have to be licensed and they have to be operable.
Well, what about trailers, for example?
Yeah. And that's what we're, I mean, like you said, maybe in your case, if someone puts a race car, puts a car and a trailer and just parks it in their front driveway. Yeah, I can see that being an issue for neighbors.
So it sounds like we have some general consensus that the RV should continue to be limited to hard paved surfaces, and that it should be restricted from the front setback. Only heard from one commissioner about parking, having RVs connected to driveways or alleys if they're parked in rear yards. Is there a general consensus on this item as well?
I would agree that it should be connected in some way. I mean, I don't know if it's on a concrete slab, if it would have to be concrete the whole way, or if we're looking at like a gravel road connecting it, just something that they can drive on. I mean, I don't know what the consensus is there, but the same reason as the accessory building, I don't know that you want them pulling into neighbor's yard or turning it around into neighbor's yard to try to get it out of somewhere.
I have a comment. If they're just parking it for the winter and it's going to be in the backyard, I don't know about having a huge driveway needed. You know, they're going to, move it a couple of times on the grass, or if it's a boat or whatever, whether, we have to have a whole paved driveway for them to get their RV. But I do believe that it should be out of the front yard.
This is Carrie. I think with regard to the paved surface, the problem that we have with gravel and pavers, as Doug was alluding to, is that they just end up anywhere. So if we consider that to be essentially impervious surface, that could migrate and end up in a situation where we then have pavement that goes beyond what is allowed by code. So I would say if we're going to require a connection, it should be pavement and not allowed on gravel or pavers.
I can see a lot of merit in Commissioner Carrillo's suggestion. I mean, if you've got a slab in your backyard, and if, I'd rather have you parking your trailer RV there than alongside your garage right next to my property line, from that perspective. So I can see that.
This is Chassie. Someone brought up trailers, so should this section be changed to RV and trailers?
I believe the full title of this section is RV, and it's like recreational equipment as well as recreational vehicles. For the purpose of the slides, though, I did cut it down to just RVs. But that's a great point.
So Doug, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So I understand, like, when Don said that someone parked like their trailer RV on their back slab in their backyard, but this is maybe one or two residents. In order for us to stay consistent, how are we gonna identify that? Some people could use it during all year long, and some people could use it twice a year. It's not gonna be tailored to every resident.
Yeah, this is a tricky one, and this is going to be, like I said, we're going to encounter a lot of challenges with this. I mean, I think we're obviously trying to give people options here, and because, as the mayor said, a lot of this is going on. Whether it's in the subdivisions or whether it's just in kind of unplatted parcels. There's a lot of that going on. So I don't know what the right answer is. And that's where I'm kind of at a little bit of a loss as far as providing you with some very strong direction as far as where we'd like to see this go.
So I have a suggestion here. Why don't we leave it as is, as it's shown on my screen, to be limited to hard paved services, was defining what hard paved services mean and restricting and prohibiting all that together. And maybe when the resident comes in for a permit or an application, whatever that may be, they can have maybe some exceptions depending on the personal use, but in general, this is the rule. And they can approach. Go ahead.
Sorry, a permit wouldn't necessarily be required for parking these things. So I think that would be a challenge to catch it before it happens.
Exactly. And this is where I'm at loss here. So if we don't have any permitting for that type of usage, then everybody will do whatever they want. And there is going to be no enforcement here.
There will be enforcement.
How? Based on what?
The code. If the code says it, then and there's going to be an outreach portion of this so that people are not just, this isn't just sprung on them. We're going to be reaching out and making sure that we have a campaign to inform people of what the rules are. And there's a a neighborhood preservation officer position that will be created.
Okay. So
But
another thing.
Sorry, but to your point, Christine, I mean, it's a lot easier to say, yes, you are parked on a hard paved surface, or no, you're not. I mean, there's really no, gray area there. It's either or, and I think that's what we're looking for is some real clarity so that we can enforce this. And you either are parked in your front setback or you aren't. So that's where we need. And yes, we will be enforcing that. It's just that it's a lot easier to enforce something that, like you said, is it paved? Is it asphalt or concrete? Yes or no? Where is it? Is it on the front, side, rear? Those are all things that are, again, very tangible. There's not a lot of discretion there. So I mean that's why we're grappling with what the standard should be.
Sure.
So what I'm hearing is that yes, we want them to be on hard paved surfaces, not gravel, not throwing down a few bricks. I'm hearing a little bit less of a consensus as to whether we want to prohibit them from the front yard or whether we want to require a connection to a driveway or an alley. Is that correct?
I ain't so concerned about the connection driveway or alley, but I could see the front setbacks, keep them out of the front yard.
Oh, why don't we, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Christine. No, you're
sorry. I'm sorry. So, I mean, the hard surfaces, yes, we've kind of kicked that one to death. But the connection to the rear, put a driveway all the way to the back or an alley, they just kind of don't exist. So I guess I'm not too concerned with that in the rear, but because even if they went back there, they'd have to pour a slab in the backyard. It's better than putting it on the grass. But I don't think they should be, I think we should recognize that front setback, prohibit it altogether.
So take out the second bullet.
I guess it's a total deterrent because nobody's gonna wrap a driveway or all the way around their house.
I agree.
You could leave it in there it ain't gonna do much harm.
And this is Chelsea. I'm just trying to understand how this is different than the accessory building where people are storing vehicles. Shouldn't it be some of the same standards?
Should.
I agree.
Because these two seem different to me and I may have missed something. So I need your assistance to understand why they look different for two sets of vehicles or 4 vehicles that are being used.
Well, I mean, there's certainly a distinction between an RV and an accessory building in terms of the mobility. Probably, maybe not even in terms of size, but that's typically you're not going to be setting up an illegal home occupation in an RV, whereas the potential for that is a lot greater in an accessory building.
Should there be a requirement for hard paved surfaces, depending on what's stored in that accessory building?
Well, you never know what's going to be in there.
Well, I think we are. Didn't we come to that consensus that we are requiring that?
Yeah.
Yes, we did.
So
And
I,
so for,
I guess for all practical purposes, you could leave this one the way it is and just define what a hard paved surface is.
however, my question is based on, for the accessory building, we made it a requirement to connect it to driveways and alleys, yet this one we're not. And they both could potentially house vehicles. This one we know for sure, the RV and trailers. The other building accessory potentially.
I mean, let's look at what we're trying to accomplish here. I mean, ultimately, our goal is that if you want to store RVs and other equipment of that nature on your lot, we'd love for you to have that in an accessory building. And if you got that accessory building, yes, you need to have that connected via a paved surface to your driveway or an alley. So, I mean, given the option of having them in an attached enclosed building, excuse me, or sitting outside, I'd rather have them in an enclosed building. So, I mean, but we understand that that's not going to be possible in every instance. So that's why we have historically and probably will continue to allow RVs and some types of equipment to be stored outside, at least seasonally.
And the reason I'm asking this is because the piece that's different are driveways and alleys. If I understood the discussion correctly, for RV and trailers, we're saying potentially no driveway and no alley is required, but agreement to no parking in the front or within the front setback. Am I understanding that correctly, Doug?
That's what I would propose, yes.
Okay. Okay.
So Doug, do we want to add a grandfather date for that since we're starting or updating those codes?
Oh boy, that's a whole nother can of worms.
I know, because this is where people are going to come in from. Well, I have this for the past 20 years. You know what I mean?
And, you know, I think we'd want to discuss grandfathering in term, you know, as a much larger issue with our legal team.
Sure.
My perspective is that, I mean, you can grandfather something like a setback or a structure, but parking of a vehicle, I'm not sure that we want to do that. I mean, at some point, we've got to say that this is the code, you can't do this anymore.
I totally understand and agree with you, but again, I'm going to play the devil advocate here.
Yeah.
You have a house that's built in 1950 and it's not that good of a shape, yet they have an RV, so they're going to spend how much, $5,000, $10,000 to put a hard surface concrete or asphalt to park their RV. This is where we're going to have a trouble, and they have doing it for the past 20, 30 years.
Yeah, I get it. You know, it's, I mean, ultimately, I think what we'd love to see is either you store that offsite, which a lot of people do, or you store it in a building.
And I agree with that approach. I just want to bring it up just in case for the purpose of the.
This is going to be a tricky one.
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like we have consensus on items 1 and 3, and then do not want to move forward with item 2. So we can then move into our next topic, which is breweries versus microbreweries. So this was a discussion that we had. We had breweries included as well as microbreweries, and then there was some confusion as to how those are different or distinguished from one another. So just wanted to show you here the definitions that we've developed and included in the draft code to help distinguish breweries from microbreweries and to help clarify what makes a microbrewery and what makes that more appropriate in our commercial districts versus a full brewery operation, which would be appropriate in the manufacturing districts. So any questions or comments on these proposed definitions?
Does this cover distilleries as well? If somebody's going to do spirits?
So the these definitions would not, no, but we do have definitions for distillery and winery included. They are and microbrewery, micro distillery, micro winery fall under very similar distinctions. The amount of beverages being, I guess, brewed or made on site, whether that's for on-site or off-premise consumption, that distinction would still be there, but the definitions would be distinct to help clarify between the type of spirit or beverage being made.
Okay. And then I guess my only other question is the benchmark we put for a brewery is 15,000 barrels. What is a typical, like, I guess, I don't know if it's a microbrewery or a brewery, like all these ones that are popping up in the 3rd Ward, what do they typically do? Is this the average that everybody kind of has in the area, is 15,000 barrels?
15,000 barrels is a very typical amount for a industrial brewery use.
By industrial, are we talking like a Leinenkugel's plant, a Miller plant? Or are we talking somebody like Lakefront or, you know, a smaller person?
So I think the best way to distinguish it is, I'm sorry, go ahead, Doug.
No, Mayor, just to give some context, I'm sure that Lakefront does quite a bit more than 15,000 barrels.
Okay. Just saying, you know, if we had an opportunity, say like, I don't know if you're familiar, Enlightened Brewery, they just moved into Bayview. They got a little bigger space. I don't know what they do. Does that number help or hurt us? I guess that's my question. Does that help or hurt us if somebody wanted to come here and set up a small shop?
I think by distinguishing what a microbrewery is from a full-scale industrial brewery, it opens up the city to those smaller operations by allowing the smaller shops in more locations. So those microbreweries are going to have fewer external impacts on neighboring properties. So we're proposing they be allowed in the B districts. Whereas
correct, but a microbrewery, I'm talking about a facility that's actually just going to produce and ship beer.
Right. So that industrial use, that would be considered the brewery.
Right. And what I'm saying is 15,000 barrels the mark, or should it be 20? Should it be 10? What if somebody small comes in and only wants to do 10, wants to take over an old industrial building on 10th Street or South Range?
Oh, I see what you're talking about.
The brewing industry itself, I think, has very clear definitions to what is a microbrewery, what is a macro brewery, what is a medium brewery. I think if you wanted to just adopt what the brewery industry itself uses.
No, I don't think I'd go with that. I'm just saying right now it says the breweries are classified as a use that manufactures more than 15,000 barrels. If I decide to become Dan's Brewery and I only want to brew 5,000 to 10,000 barrels a year and set up shop in Oak Creek, I can't come in right now.
But in that instance, a microbrewery would be allowed in manufacturing as well.
But then do you have to have the bar restaurant attached to it? Because here it says it includes a standard restaurant or bar. What if I don't want that? I just want to make the stuff.
It's not requiring a standard restaurant or bar, but it could also include, that's often an accessory to the microbrewery use, is to have that in addition to the brewing facility, whereas a brewery is much more about the manufacture of beer or other beverages.
So I think if I could, I think the mayor just wants to make sure that a brewery of any size, in any capacity, can locate in manufacturing.
Thank you, Doug. Yes, yeah. Correct.
I guess.
So it could
I
add
know
in
exactly
brewery
what Dan's trying
typically
to say.
classified.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
Okay, I'll go. I think I know what Dan's trying to say, and if you want to classify in the breweries, you use the industry's definitions. I think what you're talking about with on food and that is called a brew pub. I think that's how where you have microbrewery should be called a brew pub. And a microbrewery actually talks to how many barrels you're actually brewing, and then you can go one above a microbrewery if you want to brew more barrels. I think a brew pub is referring to on-premise making of beer and eating in restaurants. So that way you can have just a brewery, if you can call it a microbrewery, if you're only producing in order to sell off premise. And no matter what the capacity. It's a definition thing, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, because like we already have Water Street Inn. It fits the definition of what we have microbrewery.
Yeah.
I think Doug hit it on the head. If you were a small startup person and you said, well, I just, I'm going to start out. I'm just going to supply my brother-in-law's bar with 5,000 barrels, but I want to do it not in my basement. I want to do it at a rented space in Oak Creek.
Yeah.
Right here. I
It's a
don't think,
microbrewery.
yeah. I'm just worried about, we're limiting it with barrels. And again, I'm no expert. Just seems like a small person may not be able to produce that many, and it may deter him from that opening here.
So it sounds like we want to expand the definition of brewery to not necessarily be 15,000 barrels. If you are less than 15,000 barrels, you should still be allowed in the locations that a brewery would be allowed. Is that correct?
I guess that's where I'm going. Am I wrong in this?
No.
No, I think that makes sense. So perhaps distinguishing, I guess clarifying that the restaurant, bar, or tasting room is not a required component of a microbrewery, but is a typical accessory use within a microbrewery. Would that resolve your concern?
Yeah, I guess. I just don't know where startups, like where they start, where the benchmark is. If it's 5,000 barrels, 10,000, or 15. That was my question. Because it's pretty ambitious probably to get rid of 15,000 barrels of your homemade beer when you're first starting out.
So we just need to structure the definition so that a brewery of any size can be in a manufacturing zoning district.
I think that's easiest.
Okay, we can do that. All right, so moving on to our next topic. This one is about fences. So our first question about fences is whether fences and side yards, which have a proposed maximum height of 6 feet, should be required to taper when they enter the front yard, where there is a proposed maximum height of 4 feet. So instead of having the very abrupt end to the 6-foot fence, the question is whether there should be some type of taper requirement to more gradually go down to that 4-foot requirement as the fence enters the front yard.
Oh, that's interesting.
Excuse me, I have to sign off. All sorry about that.
It's okay, Chris. Okay.
See you later.
I get you. It sure would be nice, but where do you start the taper?
I don't agree with that. I think at this, from the 4 to the 6, there could be a gate. I would hate it if somebody made me taper it from the front to the back. I disagree with that.
Yeah, that's because we disallow 6 in the front. We'll allow it on the sides, but we only allow 4 in the front.
I have an example.
Yeah.
Jackie, would you mind pausing for a moment while I share?
Yes, go ahead.
This example is a fence that tapers to the front yard, and then it goes up to the rear, which has a maximum height of about 6 feet.
It's a nice looking fence.
So that
I'd
shows
be-
you how it can taper.
I'd be okay with that.
But even if it just went to a straight edge and went up 6 feet, I mean, just that little bit of taper is good. We're gonna make a code for that?
Right now, it's required that they can't be any more than a certain size in the front yard.
Yeah, I understand that. And I like that idea, but I guess the interpretation of taper could, and based on the kind of fence you have and, all those kind of things, it just seems odd.
It's
So would you define their front yard from the face of the house forward?
Yes.
Okay.
I think right now it's at the foundation line.
Okay. So
I
that taper could have happened at that front rain gutter, actually.
Well, this isn't in the city, so
Right, but I know that's probably a city of Milwaukee depiction, but
I can see that tapering from 4 to 6 feet for that variant just could be part of the privacy, especially in the back. They want it more private versus the front. And sometimes the front does not really have that much privacy needed and maybe needed to see above 4 feet for a sight distance or any road oncoming cars, whatever that may be. So it could be also some sort of a safety approach to keep the 4 feet for visual, surrounding visual, and the backyard being 6 foot or above. I don't know what is the limits, but for privacy from neighbors around. So
yeah, and
it's
I can
really
tell you,
logical. Go
I can
ahead,
tell
Carrie.
you that this fence tapers down to less than 4 feet.
I'm just saying 4 feet, it seemed reasonable to me, especially if I'm like a 5'4", 5'6". If I stand, I can see my surrounding if I'm just going for a walk around the neighborhood. So if I see oncoming person, kids with bikes, whatever that may be, we don't have to bump in each other. But in the backyard, it's all private. It's all for your own pleasure. So 6 foot or above, it makes sense in the back. So we don't want to abstain or obstruct views from the front just for requirement, whatever that requirement may be for.
And I think if you have something taller in the front and you have it on both sides, for instance, it might be difficult to see pedestrians even if you're in a vehicle.
Exactly. So we're talking the same language here. Yes, correct. I agree.
This is Chelsea. I would agree with Dawn. You want to give everybody that option to taper or not, because that may be something the homeowner, they may be for it or against it. They may even have a different idea of how to connect the 4 foot fence in the front to the 6 foot fence in the back. So I would recommend not limiting it just to a tapered option.
Or we just not allow front yard fences.
That's an option as well.
I just wanted to consider a public safety along with the property owners' benefit as well.
I mean, I've been listening to this, and you all know that I've had some fairly strong opinions with respect to fence types, and especially if we're kind of trying to move away from those open types fences, such as chain link. I think it really does create issues having even 4 foot fences in front yards, because it blocks sight distances for those backing out of the driveway. It blocks sight distances for pedestrians and bicyclists using the sidewalks. And for even if you're backing out of the driveway, it blocks sight distances potentially along that public street. So, I mean, if there are to be fences in the front yard, and I don't necessarily advocate for that, but I think that they should be as, I don't want to say translucent because that's not the right word, but it should be open as possible so that we afford the maximum extent of vision to the pedestrians and vehicles.
I definitely agree. So the way that the front yard fence standards are written currently, it would be a 4-foot maximum and a 50% maximum opacity. So that would be if you have a white picket fence, you have a board and then an open space the same width as the board and then another board, et cetera. So you still wouldn't obstruct vision in the front yard. But it's that transition from the side yard to the front yard that we're really trying to get direction on, whether that is should be tapered, whether perhaps it maybe is tapered or a gate, some type of transition so you don't have that very abrupt end to the 6-foot fence and beginning of the 4-foot fence.
Yeah, and if all we're talking about is the taper, I mean, I don't think that's necessary, and I agree with, I'm not sure who said it, to codify that. If you want one, do it. If you don't, don't. I don't think that rises to the level of needing to codify that.
Okay, so let's move into the next point.
Before we move on to the next point, I just want to make sure, are we saying a fence in the front, yes or no? Because there were a couple comments from both sides.
I would advocate for no fences in the front yards.
Okay.
And if there are exigent circumstances that rise to the level of having a variance, that's what the Board of Appeals is for.
I would add, Doug, maybe also prohibit fencing on the properties they are at intersections, especially for if they are like signal controlled, that's fine. But if they're stop sign controlled or maybe local road doesn't have that much of a control, we need the side distant vision. So pedestrian or bicycles or motor vehicles, whatever that may be, they are able to see surrounding them before they just move on. So that's also another point we have to ensure.
I think Commissioner Hanna brings up a very good point. If we're considering prohibiting fences in front yards, should fences in exterior side yards from the public realm?
This is Fred Seifert. I'm in agreement.
Are you able to hear me?
No fences in the front yard. I think it would solve a lot of problems and it would make the area look nice.
Agreed, no fences in the front yard. It solves everything.
That's what I feel.
Works.
Okay, so my question is, if we prohibit fences in the front yard, should we also consider prohibiting fences in the exterior side yard? So the side yard that faces a roadway, if the concern is for safety issues and visibility from the roadway onto the sidewalk or the private property, would the exterior side yard fence also be a concern?
What if you have a pool? And then you have to be fenced. Unfortunately, you abut a road.
Well, it could be, it doesn't have to be a block fence, like a wooded fence. It could be like a, not, I would not.
Again, privacy issues. Somebody may want that.
Well, unfortunately, this is where they live and the public prevails over. Sorry about that. My dogs are barking in the back. So honestly, I'm going to use myself as an example. I live on a corner road with a stop sign controlled. I tried to put a fence on the side. I was told like either I have like to put like a clear fence, like metal bars, not wooded one, just because it's going to prohibit side distance. And I agreed with it. I did not make a big fuss about it because I understand public safety versus my own personal privacy. And they said, if I want, I can put another fence closer by to my home that obstruct and provide me with privacy if I want to. Again, long story short, unfortunately, public safety prevails.
What you're talking about is a setback to a property line for a fence that's on a major roadway.
I'm sorry.
Rather than allowing the fence on the property line, you'd have it set back.
Correct.
So
We can do that.
The way the text is written currently, fences and exterior side yards, if they're closer to the property line, would have to have the 4-foot maximum height and the 50% maximum opacity. So similar to what the proposed requirements were for the front yard. If they were set back 10 feet, then they could be up to 6 feet and be the privacy fence, but there would be a landscape requirement between the fence and the sidewalk. So that's the language that's currently proposed.
I think that still makes sense to me. I don't know about others, but yeah.
Okay, so sounds like we want to prohibit fences from front yards and continue with the proposed standards for fences and exterior side yards. So our next point, our next question for you all is about chain link. So originally we had proposed prohibiting chain link fence in all yards, and there was discussion during that workshop about whether they should be allowed in some yards over others. And then there were some commissioners who felt strongly that chain link should be allowed in all yards. So just wanting to bring this point back to you all. Should they be prohibited in all yards, allowed in interior side and rear yards, not yards, excuse me, rear yards, and prohibited in street facing side yards, or should they be allowed in all yards?
I think originally on the discussion, I was for chain link fence. And if we're not allowing it in the front yard anyways, I don't know that that's an issue now. But I think it was brought up at the last meeting. If you have some neighborhoods, a lot of the homes already have chain link fencing. If you have 2 homes and the home in the middle wants to put up more fencing, does it look more uniform if they also put in chain link fencing, or are we going to require them then to have a wooden fence or a more of a nicer fence than chain link? So I was for allowing it still, but I do believe the consensus last meeting was to no longer allow chain link.
I would agree that prohibiting chain link fence from all residential properties would be my recommendation, just because of the aesthetic of the homes and the value of the homes. Either it's myself or my neighbors or anyone around me. From my experience, chain link fence are pretty much used for commercial and industrial buildings. So if we currently have people having those chain link fence, again, I'm not sure if we're gonna go enforce it for them to replace it, but maybe adding some aesthetic landscaping that may help shield that fence. But again, it's still a cost. So I don't know what others think about that.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of them.
Okay, so it sounds like there's some general consensus that chain link should be prohibited in all yards.
I don't agree with if that's the consensus. I certainly will stand by that.
So our last question, I'm sorry, go ahead.
In regards to the chain link fences. So my comment is similar to before. It may depend on individuals' preferences. A chain link fence or a wood fence or the newer style fence. So as long as it is in the correct areas, meaning in the backyard or is not in the front or on the side or the street facing side, that should kind of be up to the homeowner. So I would be open to any type of fence, depending on that person's style.
Kind of agree. I mean, wood fences and composite fences are crazy expensive. And if someone wants a fence and just doesn't have the means to put up a ridiculously expensive fence, I'd be okay with saying keeping it to the backyard, maybe not up the side, definitely not the front. But I mean, I'm not here to tell people, how much money they got to spend on a fence. It could still be done somewhat to look good. They have to keep it up. You can't have a brown rusty fence. I kind of agree with Chauncey on this one.
So many communities allow for chain link fences in rear yards only. And many restrict that to coated chain link. So it's not just the plain metal. It does have that usually a black or green coating that helps the wear and tear, helps the upkeep of the fence. So that if the direction is to allow it in the rear yards, I would recommend having the coated chain link rather than just the untreated or uncoated chain link.
And I think that's fine.
So I have a question here. What if that owner of that house put that coated chain link fence, but his neighbor that is not in favor of that, even though it's on his property, and it will depreciate his house value? How is this gonna work?
They can put up a better looking fence. It's not my responsibility as long as I'm following the code to make sure my neighbor's value, or maybe there's a lot of different ways of looking at property values. It's not my responsibility to increase his property value as long as I'm following the code. And I see nothing wrong with PVC coated fence if that's a compromise we can make.
I mean, to be totally honest, some of the worst fences I've seen in this community are not chain link. They're wooden or they're PVC. And you've got to maintain your property no matter what. Whether it's maintaining your chain link fence or your composite fence, because there's some pretty bad looking ones which aren't chain link.
Yeah, you're right, Doug. So what's the consensus on this? Chain link in the back? Chain link just on the back side?
I would recommend, Mr. Mayor, that we take a vote on this because I hear mixed opinions. So maybe we can take a vote on that and see what the majority would prefer, I guess.
Okay, straw poll, chain link allowed backyards only. Christine?
No.
Matt?
Not working. Sorry, my thing's not working. Yeah, in the backyard only.
Okay. Dawn?
No, not anywhere.
Greg?
Yes, I would allow it.
Chris is gone. Don?
Sorry. Yes, backyard only.
Okay, I think we're over there already. Fred?
Chain link in the backyard.
Okay. Chauncey?
Yes, chain link in the backyard.
Chain link in the backyard wins.
All right, very good. So that sort of eliminates the need to have the conversation about this last one, since chain link will continue to be allowed in the rear yard.
All right.
All right, so moving on to our next point. So signs for special uses, special events. So there was some concern that the temporary sign standards that were included or proposed in the new sign ordinance chapter would limit special events from having the amount of signage that would really be needed, and it would be very difficult to tell exactly how much temporary signage would be needed for an unknown special event. So I just wanted to bring this language to everyone's attention. So this is, I believe, current language from the special events permitting process, where it really allows for the amount of temporary signage to be determined through the special event permitting process, so it can be considered on a case-by-case basis rather than having a hard standard or a strict standard that might not apply to all types of special events. So I just wanted to bring this to everyone's attention to ensure that the temporary sign standards would not be overly restrictive to these types of events. All right, so moving into our next item, electric vehicle charging stations. So this was an item that was brought up by staff and wanted to bring this forward to you all. So first, if a developer chooses to install electric vehicle charging stations, should those parking spaces where the charging stations are installed, should they count towards the minimum amount of parking that's required for that use? I will say many communities are allowing for electric, and some are even going as far as requiring a minimum number of charging stations be installed in all new parking lots. So this would not be uncommon or out of trend to allow electric vehicle charging stations to count towards minimum parking requirements.
I would say they should count for minimum parking.
Yep.
This is Chassie, I agree.
I agree too.
I agree. I feel that that's a little bit of an incentive to install them, as opposed to us requiring that certain businesses install them. But it feels like they're almost penalized by installing them if it takes away from their parking requirement. So I would be in favor of it.
I'm in favor of it.
Okay.
Very good. So it sounds like we've got consensus on that one. Our second point for electric vehicle charging stations. So as we were discussing whether they should count towards minimum parking requirements, we thought it might be pertinent to also address electric vehicle charging stations as a primary use of a property. So perhaps similar to a gas station, you would have electric vehicle charging station as its own principal use. Is that something that we should consider including? And if so, should that be held to similar standards as fuel stations?
I guess I'll just reference Doug. Doug, what did we do for the Tesla thing?
Well, that was just approved as part of the site plan for Meyer. But think about it in terms of over on First Street, granted this CNG, but I mean, it's a gas station, but you still have the same impacts. You've got the canopy, you've got the islands. It's probably not going to be just sitting out there by itself. You've probably got a C-store attached to it. So I'd say, yes, we should allow them as a primary use, or as a condition that we should treat them exactly the same way as gas stations.
I would say the same. I guess when it comes to an electric charging station, I picture more of a parking lot with like the Tesla thing versus, because you can't do it quickly.
So the battery technology for electric vehicles is really evolving in a way that it's predicted to be able to charge up a vehicle in about 15 minutes. So as electric vehicles become more mainstream and more regularly used, there is a potential to have a standalone electric vehicle charging station similar to gas stations. So this would be very forward-looking to include this. It's definitely not a use you'll be seeing, as soon as this is adopted, but this code is really meant to carry you guys through the next 5-10 years. So very forward-looking in terms of having it be something that's included. And I agree with Doug, having them meet the same standards as gas stations makes the most sense.
Makes sense to me too. Everybody else, what do you think?
This
I
is
agree.
Chassie. I just
Agreed.
Chauncey?
yes.
What you got to say?
Yes, I just have a quick question. When we say allow them as primary use, can you provide a little more information on what that means versus secondary use? What, yes.
Definitely. So a primary use, like a gas station, the purpose of that lot is for the gas station, or is for saying you would see electric vehicle charging stations as accessory to an existing parking lot. So it's a parking lot for the Meijer, and they're installing some electric vehicle charging stations within that parking lot. So what we're asking about is if there would be a need or a demand for a standalone electric vehicle charging station, very similar to a gas station, if that's something you all would want to consider allowing.
I would allow it, yes. If someone's willing
Allow
to spend the money to have a station alone, they probably know what they're doing and are expecting there's a need for it. So, or else they wouldn't spend the money to put one in. So I would allow it.
So quick question, and this may be for the mayor or Doug. So Meijer, is that considered, their stations are primary use?
No, that was, Meijer came first and Tesla came in afterward and asked if they could use 10 parking stalls from the Meijer parking lot to install their electric charging stations. It's an accessory use.
So are we saying it's a primary use if the main focus is charging electric vehicles?
Yes, so instead of gas pumps, you'd have charging stations.
Okay. So how would a Meijer be classified in this category? Because
It wouldn't, because the Meijer store was the primary use.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, so it sounds like we have some general consensus on both of these items. So we'll update the parking standards to allow for both of these. All right, so moving on to our next item, certificates of zoning compliance. So this is something that staff wanted to bring back to your attention, confirm that you want to move forward with this. So there was some general consensus during our last Plan Commission workshop that the certificate of zoning compliance makes sense, but this would be a new certificate process for the city. So staff just wanted to make sure this is something that we wanted to carry forward. So they would be proposed to be required when a new use occupies an existing building and before a building permit or certificate of occupancy is issued. And it would just be to verify that they meet all of the standards of the zoning code. So it also helps to improve communication and coordination between different city departments as you have building permits and certificates of occupancy approved by non-planning staff. So this would give planning staff the opportunity to give the okay, give the thumbs up that that use complies with all of the requirements of the zoning code.
Just as a quick question of clarification, I'm going to use Boots as the example on this one. Is this something that they would be required to report? I know they kind of left and a couple new restaurants have just gone into that building. Does this cover that? Or when it says new use, does it mean something other than a restaurant, for example?
Greg, I would say when there was a change in occupancy, and to the extent that a different restaurant may require a due occupancy permit, I think that's I think it's kind of like a checkup, just so so everyone knows what they're getting into, and so we've got some record of what's going on, and as of this date, your property complied. I mean, that's in many cases we do the same thing on a very limited basis. It's called a property status report. It says, yeah, here's your zoning. Yeah, you're in a floodplain, yes or no. You're a wetland, yes or no. I think it's just something that it's a check-in point between the building user, building owner, and the city, so that we can address situations before they get out of control. And I don't believe it's uncommon in the industry. I think that many communities have these types of use certificates or compliance certificates. And maybe Jackie, you can kind of comment on that. And I think that it's probably something that we should have had probably sooner, and I would be in favor of having this.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I agree. I'm in favor of this.
And just to answer Doug's question, these are very typical in communities. You see these requirements very regularly. And if a space and the old restaurant met all of the zoning requirements, it'll be a really quick, easy, check of the box. But if there were some issues, then it allows the city to address those before the new user comes in and is surprised by some sort of requirement that they weren't meeting originally. So sounds like we have our general consensus on this item, so we can move fix that we failed to include in our bring back of some of these points. Anything that you wanted to discuss further that we didn't mention?
I just wanted to, not to extend this too much longer, I just wanted to touch on, I know during the last meeting that the signs in yards was brought up, and I believe it was proposed 2 signs per yard. I guess I just had concern, I feel, and I'll just use this election cycle as an example, for something like, if you have certain aldermen or the mayor or school board members all running and somebody wants to support more than 2 people, I'm not saying increase it by a lot, but I mean, just the school board alone, I think people are voting for 3 individuals. But this would prevent them from displaying more than 2 signs. So I don't necessarily agree with it. I get the point, and I don't want every yard filled with signs, but I think a slight increase would be beneficial.
So I believe that.
I completely disagree with you, Greg. It's just kind of funny because you are an elected official, but from my standpoint, I'm never going to vote on anyone that I see a sign in somebody's yard. And as I'm going down Howell Avenue, just today, in front of a Kohl's is the oil shop, and they have like 12, and I'm like, hey, thank God we have a new code coming, because then we won't see all that mess, because you really don't read any of them if there's so many of them. So I was super stoked that this is becoming part of the city, and that we're not going to have all these areas papered with the yard signs. Sorry, Greg.
It's okay. And I do not put them in my yard, but
I agree with you, Don, 100%. This is just becoming a mess everywhere. I see those signs and I'm like, my gosh, that's too much.
I think we're in consensus there.
All right, very good. If there's no additional discussion and additional topics we want to bring back to the group, we can move on to our next steps. This will just take a second. So we are squarely into our draft and final ordinance stage. So we'll be working with staff to incorporate these final revisions, get the full draft ready for public review, and then go out for an outreach process, a community education process, to ensure that everyone is well aware of the changes that are coming and how they might be impacted by them. So you'll definitely be hearing more about what that outreach process will entail once the full draft ordinance is ready for public consideration. So with that, thank you all so much. I appreciate your time and all of your discussion. It's been very helpful and very productive.
Great, thank you, Jackie. No, appreciate all the work. As I said some time back, we get to do some flashy, fun stuff, but this is really the important stuff. We're going to set the tone for it for the next 10 years on things from charging stations and things we don't even see. So I do appreciate the time and effort everybody took tonight. I know it was rather long and it was a heavy agenda, but hey, when you're a successful city, you have these kind of problems. So Carrie, Doug, anything else?
I think that's enough for tonight.
Yeah,
Okay, I agree. I think with that, before we adjourn, for anybody that
I
might
would
be
just
out there.
ask, I
Oh,
would
go
just
ahead.
ask if there's any questions, concerns, or if anybody wants to do a tabletop exercise, please let me know. I can schedule it as part of a meeting so that we have enough time to do so. I would really encourage you all to go through the code again, the proposed code. If anything pops out, please let me know. We can have a discussion. I can get those comments to Jackie.
Terry, or Dan, whoever, just for the record, I think I've stated before, I'd rather have these meetings separate, not tailing end on planning. I mean, poor Matt had to spend 4 hours in his car, for goodness sake.
Yeah, I know. I know. Sorry,
You know,
Matt.
I felt like there was some people getting rushed. If you're going to bring it to the planning commission, we should have the right to say what we want about anything on the agenda. And if it's, you know, if we're going to get rushed because we're turning it into a 4-hour meeting, we should just have these meetings separately. That's my opinion, my 2 cents, and that's it. Thank you.
If that's the case, then we're going to have to schedule special meetings. And if the plan commission is okay with that, we can certainly do so.
Yeah, we can do it case by case. That's fine.
We can bring it up consensus wise.
Yes.
Definitely, my whole life's a meeting, so it doesn't matter to me. One more ain't gonna kill me. So.
Oh, one additional comment. I believe Jackie identified that the draft will be written up and then it will be shared with the public, all the changes. I believe Doug identified that we should run this by our attorney for the grandfather clause, because I know that will come up a lot.
Yes.
A lot of those items.
Yes, we've been providing the code update drafts to the city attorney for her review.
And Carrie, you could use, if you want to use the farmer's market as an outreach, you know, have a table and talk to the community. That's up to you. You're more than
Great.
welcome.
Thank you so much.
That's actually a pretty good idea. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, before we adjourn, just one announcement. The Celebrations Commission this year, last year, the Easter egg hunt got canceled. They are not doing a traditional Easter egg hunt, but what they're doing is an Easter egg drive-through down at Lake Vista this Saturday. It will be from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. down at Lake Vista. You'll enter on the south side of the park and you'll drive through. You'll be able to pick up an Easter bag for the kids and possibly even visit the Easter Bunny, weather permitting. He may make an appearance. So if you're interested, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. this Saturday at Lake Vista. And then with that, we get a motion to adjourn.
Grillo moves to adjourn at 9:44.
Hey, John, you want to? Oh, go ahead, Fred.
Seifert seconds.
Okay. Roll call. Matt, we're going to get you out of the car first.
Sullivan, aye.
Grillo, aye.
Lorick, aye.
Gavich, aye.
Hold aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Hannah, aye.
Okay, that is it. Thank you again. I know it was a long night, but again, very important we get it done. And again, thank you to staff, Tom and IT, Doug, Carrie, thanks. There was a lot going on here tonight. And all in all, we accomplished quite a bit, believe it or not. So, all right, everybody, good night. I will see you all soon.
Thank you.